forth and do good.
Well, good morning, everyone. Good to see our board here. Things have changed. We got the first shower, I think, since somewhere in early April. So nice to see a little weather change and cooling down and harvest slowly coming to an end. I know on the way up I smelled all the wet grass and the wine fermenting around the Lodi area. So great. The fall is definitely here.
I miss my old job.
So if you'll join me for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Josh, would you please do the roll call for us?
Yes, sir. Rochelle Arizmendi. Ashley Bourne. Here. Don Bransford. Don Cameron. Here. Nancy Cassidy. Here. Helene Dillard. Here. Mike Galla. Here. Crystal Haling. Here. Eric Holst. Jeff Huckabee. Bryce Lumberg. Martha Montoya. Frank Muller. Here. Joyce Sterling. And Andy Thulin. Mr. President, we have quorum.
Thank you, Josh. You've received the minutes from the last meeting. We need a motion to approve. And a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? So moved. All right. Secretary Ross, a departmental update.
Since we have some outstanding staff members that will be speaking here, I'm going to be very brief. Just a couple things that I wanted to make sure you were aware of. Our staff is working very hard this week. We're about ready to release what will be the final regs. Well, I don't know. Everything's always almost final. Final regs for the cannabis program that, we've been operating under emergency regs. So it's been a lot of work, a lot of different players. I'm looking at Rachel and at Jenny because there have been a couple issues that we're still working out with a couple of our sister agencies. But we have great staff. They're very enthusiastic, very dedicated to this program. And the new division director, Richard Parrott, has been a real asset for us. So I wanted to make you aware of that. I know there have been a lot of questions about why there aren't more licenses, and it is because we put a lot of this at the local level. It's kind of the Governor Brown way, and a lot of local governments are taking a wait-and-see attitude. So there's still, and there have been some counties, Yellow I think is one that's revisiting some of that. So this will be an evolving program. I did want to mention that our citrus program continues to expand, unfortunately, one backyard tree at a time. But again, we've got very responsive staff. They get on it right away. We're working closely with the citrus board, and we'll continue to do everything that we can to keep it, frankly, in the urban areas and out of the commercial production areas. I spoke at probably my last annual meeting of Ag in the Classroom for teachers last week, and they were in Riverside County and Palm Springs. It was 104, which the hotel fondly calls our weather is when you go outside, it's like a warm hug. Tom knows about that. I think he spent some time in that area. But I will tell you, it was so fun. That program has been, usually they've got about 175, 180 teachers, very enthusiastic, really, so excited to take learning and take it to all these children up and down the state. Last week they had over 254, and of that, over 150 were teachers who were there for their first time or implementing Ag in the Classroom into their curriculum for the first time. And they love, love, love it, and I hate to use that Cal Poly saying, but learn by doing is still the best way. To hear them talk about what they're doing with school gardens and the nutrition aspect and the science aspect, I can't say enough good about it. And I bring it up specifically just to remind people, if you don't have an ag specialty plate, please consider buying one for all of your vehicles. All of them, because that money goes into an ag literacy fund. And that grant program, I think, Crystal, we're in the taking requests for proposals right now, right? FFA and Ag Leadership really helped, do a lot of the heavy work to get it qualified, and Josh and Crystal's here to talk about it, have done a lot of the work working with our friends at DMV, but it's a great program. So it's one way of supporting ag literacy, and Ag in the Classroom has qualified for a couple of those as well. And then I just wanted to close on the really good work that the San Joaquin Valley Partnership has done. That was created by our previous governor, Schwarzenegger, I think in 2009 or 2010, to really help bring the 8 counties in the San Joaquin Valley together. And the work that they are doing on education all the way kindergarten through UC Merced, and to see all of those schools and the community colleges working together on that, on the work on ag technology, ag manufacturing, developing those expert areas around water technology, workforce development, to see that, the local government, the private sector, and the state cabinets come together on a quarterly basis, set priorities, and what it's doing in the San Joaquin Valley is pretty impressive. So we're very hopeful that the next governor will want to continue the work under the executive order that Governor Brown chose to leave in place. So it's great stuff happening there, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about that at any time. And then I wanted to introduce, if it's okay, we have a new staff member. I think I told everyone at our last meeting that we're going through interviews, and Thea Rittenhouse is here today. I'm going to have Thea come up. She is our Farm Equity Advisor. This is a new position that was created under legislation that passed last year, and we're thrilled to have Thea here. She's going to tell you a little bit about herself. And one of the reasons she's excited to have this job is that it's fun to be the first person to help create the program and get it stood up the way you envision it. And then everybody else can do whatever they want to afterwards, right, Thea? So come on up and introduce yourself to the board. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Good morning. So as Secretary Ross said, my position was created, some of you may or may not know already, that with the passage of AB 1348, which is the Farmer Equity Act. And so some of the things that were included in that act included ensuring the inclusion of socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers in development, adoption, implementation of policies and programs. That California recognizes the importance of including long-term investment in all farmers and ranchers in California. And a couple of other things, that farmers, socially disadvantaged farmers have not had equitable access to resources necessary to run their farm businesses at all times. And so this act is creating not only my position, but the opportunity to really take a look at some of the policies and programs and how we can better include all farmers and ranchers in California. Also that female farmers represent less than 25% of California farmers, and only 2% of those are females of color. I happen to be a farmer as well, so I'm very proud to be stepping into this position with my experiences as a farmer. Socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers tend to have fewer acres, but a greater diversity of crops grown, and existing programs often don't provide sufficient or appropriate technical assistance to some of these types of farmers. And we're including both rural and urban farmers in this language. So despite these barriers, there still are increasing numbers of these farmers getting started farming or continuing to farm in California. So my position, which includes a lot of different aspects of this AB 1348, will really be taking a look at the policies and programs, looking at technical assistance and how it's provided to all farmers. It's going to be forming really better connections and collaborations with groups outside of CDFA, nonprofit organizations, cooperative extension, NRCS federal programs that are available for farmers, resource conservation districts, all of these existing organizations that, fortunately, my background has been working with all of these organizations. So I'm new to state service, I've come from about a decade of working both in the nonprofit sector and also with farm to school programs and a lot of other different various things related to agriculture. So in addition to owning my own farm. So I feel like this is a wonderful opportunity for me to bring these other experiences to this position and really help to be a liaison between the government programs and resources that exist and bring those resources to the farmers. In addition, really designing and understanding how we can have better outreach programs and appropriate technical assistance for farmers, and ensuring that farmers that may not have a voice will have a voice in some of these policies and programs as we go forth. There's some specific language within the bill that talks about the different areas that I'll be focusing on. I just started 2 weeks ago. Well, 1 week, yeah, so I'm just getting used to learning about all of the CDF side of things. So that's really what I'm spending my attention on for the next few weeks. And I hope that I'll be giving another presentation to the board in future meetings with a more concrete plan. There is, by the end of 2020, I'll be preparing and submitting a report to the new governor and the legislature about these goals and specifics for implementation of this Farmer Equity Act. So if you have any other questions, please let me know or find me at lunch, and I'd be happy to talk with you more about.
Yeah, so I have one. Thea, where are you from and what do you farm?
Originally, I'm originally from Illinois, from the Midwest. I grew up on a farm there, but a different type of, corn and soybean farm. But here I farm organic fruits and vegetables, in Yolo County. So, thank you.
It's probably too soon to ask you, but is there an interface with AB 2377 as far as technical assistance?
I'm sure there will be, yes. Mm-hmm.
And also, do you have any staff?
That's me.
You're it? Do you speak anything besides English?
Yes, I do. I'm fluent in Spanish as well.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Well, yes. And additionally, I had a lot of experience working with other socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers that are non-native English speakers. So I've had the opportunity to design technical assistance and help farmers to access these programs where English is not their native language, where written applications don't often work, where the best thing is sitting down and taking the time to go through things. So that practical part of my experience, I think, will really help inform my position a lot. So you're welcome. Anyone else?
Anyone else?
Yeah,
Crystal?
that was really so helpful. Thank you and welcome. So could you talk a little bit about what your experience has been around diversity and equity work with farmers? Because that seems like you bring a wealth of experience to that. So it'd be great to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So I've worked both at the University of California, Davis as a graduate student researcher doing a lot of work with farm workers and understanding access to housing and working conditions. So I've spent some time doing lots of research and interviews with farmers over 2 or 3 years working with those groups. And also the past 4 years, I've been working with a nonprofit organization called the National Center of Appropriate Technology over in Davis. And our entire mandate has been to work with socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers. So I've done things like design workshops, teach workshops for farmers, gone to farms and done, actually helped with healthy soils, the Healthy Soil Program application for a lot of farmers that were native Spanish speakers. I began and it'll now be the 4th year of doing the Latino Farmer Conference, so it's an all Spanish language conference geared towards producers of all crops, of all sizes, and this will be the 4th year for that conference. So I started that in partnership with NRCS 4 years ago. and really looking at how to target urban farmers as well. So trying to do different business planning for farmers in urban areas, which is very different than in rural areas. So I worked on a grant project related to that. And also working in combination with the Slough House Resource Conservation District and Cooperative Extension in Yolo County to do an outreach project with a strawberry farm, Mien and Hmong strawberry farmers in the Sacramento area. So we were trying to help those farmers to implement some new conservation programs on their farm, which took a couple of years, but I've been through the experience of providing that technical assistance, and it takes time, but it's really worth it when you see the results. They were able to put in a hedgerow and started to implement some of the conservation practices that we were working with them on. So, you're welcome.
Just one quick thing. I can see why you hired her. In anticipation of your 2020 report and future ones, and I'm sure you're already thinking about this, but thinking about some baseline measures that you can then show progress against
Yes.
in those reports, seems like a good time to be putting those in place.
Exactly. I agree.
Anyone else? Well, Thea, thank you very much. You bring a lot to the table, and welcome to CDFA.
Thank you very much.
All right, we're going to move on to the legislative update. I'd like to ask Deputy Secretary Rachel O'Brien to come forward there.
And sorry.
Go ahead.
What? Oh.
Very good.
I can't say enough good about Rachel. She started January on a run, and she's still running. She has really brought a lot to the department, and we're very fortunate to have her. She's really done a great job, so I want to make sure that she knows that we appreciate her.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary Ross. I can't be remiss without saying that I had some big shoes to fill with Taylor and Jim leaving, and it has been a really exciting year, an honor to serve at this department, to serve you and the other farmers and ranchers throughout the state and citizens of California. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Hello and good morning, board members. I am Rachel O'Brien. I'm the Deputy Secretary of Legislative Affairs. I'm here today just to provide a brief update for our 2018 legislative cycle. I'm going to move into just some really high-level kind of themes. These were trailer bills or kind of bills of statewide significance. And the first one up is the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water legislation. Some of you will remember this as SB 623 by Senator Monning last year. This, of course, then ended up becoming a part of Governor Brown's 2018 budget package. Unfortunately, this part of the package did not move forward, and Senator Monning picked up the piece again and split the bill into SB 844 and 845. The pair of bills would have created a source of funding for critically needed, a source of funding that's critically needed for disadvantaged communities in need of water cleanup projects. The fund would have been sourced by a voluntary charge on residential water bills, as well as some ag producers. Not taking action on this bill was a missed opportunity for the state, but thankfully Senator Monning and Assembly leadership have committed to finding a solution and addressing this issue in the 2019 legislative cycle. After that, there is our Climate Smart Agricultural Funding. This came in the form of SB 856. This was part of the governor's larger package that he signed, which was $201.4 billion on June 27th. This 18-19 budget included a number of proposals from CDFA. This was in the main budget bill, which was SB 840. This was for programs such as our antibiotic stewardship and citrus pest and disease prevention, and significant funding for these climate smart agricultural programs. CDFA received $99 million for our dairy digester research and development and alternative manure management programs, and $5 million for our healthy soils program. I didn't put it on the slide, but there was another piece to the budget that actually was really important. It was originally an Assemblymember Ting bill. It was AB 2335. It ended up being worked through a budget trailer bill to create a healthy stores refrigeration grant program. This is a first-of-its-kind program within CDFA that will assist neighborhood markets or corner stores located in food deserts in purchasing energy efficiency refrigeration units that will help those markets to be able to sell fresh produce and other fresh products in those corner markets. This is really exciting. The bill also made some changes to our existing nutrition incentive matching grant program, also known as CNIP, that's housed within the Office of Farm to Fork. So really positive piece of policy to come out of the budgetary process. Next, a big theme this year was wildfires. SB 901, which was a Senator Dodd bill, was signed by the governor along with a number of other policies around wildfires. This one specifically, there was a special legislative committee that was formed to attack this issue. And this was the product of that committee. This was a very wide-ranging bill that boosts the state's forest management activities, such as tree thinning, updating requirements for maintenance and operations of utility infrastructure, and with the theme of protecting ratepayers and utility workers. So this is a comprehensive package. The state hasn't passed a package like this for wildfire protection in decades. And it also provides $200 million in greenhouse gas reduction funds through the fiscal year 2023 and 2024 to annually go to projects around forest health, fire prevention, and fire reduction. And the last one on the list was renewable energy and SB 100, a Senator De Leon bill. This is building off of the state's renewable energy mandates to create a new policy that would make the state's electricity grid 100% carbon-free by 2054. And the hope really is that this new measure spurs companies to innovate, to develop big and cheap enough batteries that we can invest in storage for these intermittent renewable energy resources. So it'd be remiss to note that there was a lot of concerns about the costs that this would incur on ratepayers. But I thought it was really interesting. I found that while California's electricity rates are the 7th highest in the nation, the state's energy efficiency programs, have reduced household consumption so much that consumer utility bills are the 6th lowest in the country. So really important to take that in mind when we're thinking about big policies like this. And the governor himself said that this is going to take expert engineering, scientific research, political collaboration, and great wisdom to forge ahead, not in one administration, but in several. So with that, I'm going to move into the kind of meat, the agricultural bills, in which there were a lot of bills this year that we got involved in. The first up was AB 1165, and I kind of just put these in number AB, SB order, so no significance around any one or the other. But there was AB 1165 by Assemblymember Caballero. This bill would have established the Agricultural Sustainability Council. It would have required the council to plan for regulatory alignments that aided in grower compliance, reduced costs to the agricultural industry, and protected the environment. That was the kind of theme of the bill. The way it approached it ultimately did not end up being successful with the governor's vision, and he did veto this bill. But I think with positions like Thea's coming on board, I think there's a lot of momentum about how we can help and aid in grower compliance around regulatory goals that we have here in the state. So we have AB 2377, an Irwin bill, as many of you have just brought up before. This bill requires CDFA to establish a technical assistance grant program that will provide funding to technical assistance providers to work with applicants for healthy soils, our alternative manure management program, and our statewide efficiency and enhancement program. We also had AB 2421 Stone. This was a Wildlife Conservation Board bill that would establish the Monarch Butterfly and Pollinator Rescue Program. This is administered by the Wildlife Conservation Board, but it's in collaboration with the department. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't note, this was a bill sponsored by the Environmental Defense Fund, so thank you. And we are excited around collaborating with the board to develop program guidelines. We also had AB 2468. This was an Assemblymember Rambula bill. This would make changes around the laws governing the registration of the location of apiary colonies or beehives within the state. We had AB 2470. This bill codifies the Invasive Species Council of California. This is a council that's existed. Our secretary co-chairs that council. And so it's exciting to see that council codified and to move beyond administrations. And then the second half of that bill also set up a program to be able to address shuffleboard, which is an invasive species that's been very detrimental to urban core trees. And next we had SB 668, which was a McGuire bill. This actually was a bill that came out of the department's feed advisory board. It was to get at some of the more egregious violators, repeat offenders of our commercial feed laws. We had SB 965. This was a bill by Senator McGuire allowing for the establishment of the California Cattle Council. So cattlemen and women across the state do have to petition the department, of course, to vote on a referendum to assess a $1 charge on their producers for the establishment of this. We also had SB 1409. This was a Senator Wilk bill. This is a hard bill to kind of encapsulate quickly, but I will try just to say that the bill, really, the heart of it was trying to update the laws by allowing for industrial hemp cultivation, and specifically industrial hemp pilot programs to proceed as they were intended under the 2014 Farm Bill, and by updating the definition of industrial hemp to reflect the differences between industrial hemp and cannabis. And so it was exciting to see that this bill does support CDFA's efforts to create a registration program and then clarify some of the enforcement and implementation that will ultimately provide a pathway forward for growers and processors to participate in this marketplace. And the last one was SB 1459. This was a bill to really help get at local control that we're dealing with on the cannabis front, where some of the local governments, they have to go through a site-specific CEQA process, and that process is really thorough and was creating a lot of timeline issues. So this bill kind of creates, I would say, it allows the department to issue annual licenses on a provisional basis. So the title's a little misleading. It does say a provisional license, but it's really important to note that it's still an annual license. You still have to meet all the same standards. You just have to recognize to the department in your application process that you're in the process of going through CEQA with your local jurisdiction. And last up, not last up, but this is a little kind of clearing the deck that I wanted to add here. And the guys in the back are going to run a video for you guys real quick. If you hadn't had a chance to see this, it's pretty awesome. I hope you guys enjoyed that, and I'm just in case anybody missed it, in the last bill that the governor signed, he wrote a little PS note, and I think it's a very positive note to see that he's off to the promised land, of course, Colusa County. And my last slide, I didn't want to leave out ballot initiatives. They do play an important role. One of the ones, I just wanted to start off real quick, I didn't add to the slide here, but there was on the June 5th election, Proposition 68, which came off the heels of SB 5, which was passed last year. And this was an all-encompassing bill to address water infrastructure, natural and working lands, and really environmental landscapes. And in that package was $18 million for our county fairgrounds. There was $20 million for SWEEP and $10 million for healthy soils. So that was really great. That was passed by the voters, and the department also got our budget change proposal approved by the legislature this year. So up for November, we've got, I would say, kind of 3 ones that I felt were relevant to highlight for everybody today. First was Proposition 3, which would issue an $8.877 billion bond for water-related infrastructure and environmental projects. This is the Water Infrastructure and Watershed Conservation Bond Initiative. There's Prop 6, which repeals the 2017 fuel tax and vehicle fuel fee increases and requires the public to vote on future increases. I'm sure you guys will all be hearing a lot about this bill. It's very high, this proposition, it's very high profile. And the last is Proposition 12. This is the Farm Animal Confinement Initiative. And this would ban the sale of meat and eggs from calves raised from veal, breeding pigs, egg-laying hens that are confined in areas below a specified number of square feet, kind of depending on the animal. And this proposition, sorry, I'm on the bill mode, this proposition will require the department to promulgate regulations with the Department of Public Health. So with that, I just wanted to leave you guys with our contact information. It's in your slides if you ever need to reach out on anything. And then last up is just any questions that you might have for me today.
I had a quick question on whether or not, has there been any help for the ranchers who had acres and acres that burned from the wildfires?
Those are programs through USDA, and there are a number of programs for fencing in particular, which is usually a big hit. But those are programs through, I don't know if you were here when we had Aubrey Betancourt, who's the Farm Services Agency Director. Her offices are in Davis. So that's where the vast majority of assistance programs are, in addition to the Natural Resource Conservation Service.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this report. It's very, I know.
This was for you and
so
Bryce.
excited.
Where's Bryce?
On the grants for the corner stores, I just wanted to put a plug in for the possibility, if it's not been included, for some modest amount, maybe up to $1,000 a year, to pay for plumbers to come and inspect the compressors and the like, because those corner stores, it's very hard to maintain and keep those units clean, and of course that's a big possibility for greenhouse gas leaking. So I don't know if it's in there, but just
There
a
is
word.
actually, there will be money available for the actual kind of installation and of the refrigeration units. We've talked about other ideas. The program, of course, will have to hire and develop that out, but talked about other kind of creative solutions that could help meet some of those needs.
Yeah, like a plumber 4 times a year would be good.
I'm making a note. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you for your presentation. Not working? No? How about now? Okay.
Yes.
Could you explain 2468 a little bit, the apiary one, what the
Yes.
need was and what it's going to do?
Yes. So this bill will establish a registration program so that the department and the county ag commissioners can register the apiaries so they know where the apiaries are moving and are located. This will really, I think the need that was driving this was understanding kind of where our pollinators are located, where they're tracking. There's been a lot of theft of apiaries in recent years. There's also been concerns around pesticide drift. affecting the apiary colonies. So it's allowed to allow for a little bit more of a coordinated approach between the department, the ag commissioners, and the apiary community, as well as growers, to kind of identify where all that movement's happening and how we can help the apiary community.
So will every movement will have to be reported then on a daily basis? Will it go that far?
You know, I can follow up with you on that question. I think that there will be an update of where the apiaries are located. Like, so they get moved and they're usually there for, you know, kind of a set amount of time. And I think if once they move them somewhere new, that would have to be updated. But I can check with our program on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and follow up with you.
Okay, thank you. And I
Yeah.
have another question. I think the word I've heard most today is healthy soils. It seems like it's kind of included in a lot of different bills. Does that create an issue with competing departments, or is there collaboration amongst all these groups to work on the healthy soils initiatives?
I haven't been involved in any, I would say, trouble between the different agencies on that. I think there's been a lot of co-collaboration across the administration through our science and technology panel. Is that right?
So there are a couple things. We have the Healthy Soils program, which is housed here. And then Jenny also leads the Healthy Soils Initiative, which is a cross-agency initiative, just to build awareness of what's possible on publicly owned lands, state-controlled lands, as well as the private sector. And I think one of the things I was remiss in mentioning is that the next 2 months, we're going to be very busy on finalizing and fleshing out the natural working land strategy that's part of the scoping plan. And the level of enthusiasm as people understand what's possible with carbon sequestration on private lands, rangeland, forests, of really getting the numbers right for what our goals are going to be and how we're going to approach that. So the work of the initiative is how we try to coordinate across agency to make sure that that's going forward in a positive, similar track.
Rachel, I had one question on the bee, what Frank brought up on the bee legislation. Because currently, is it a voluntary program as far as registration throughout the county?
That's
And
correct.
so this is going to turn it into a mandatory program?
That's correct.
Well, I think we had always required registration. It wasn't happening because there wasn't funding for enforcement of that. And the problem is these beehives, as we all know, have become very valuable. There have been increasing theft issues as well as rogue placement of, so that's what created some of the conflicts with pesticide spray drift. So this is the best way, working across local and state and with the industry itself, to provide protections for the hives, to make sure they're getting placed in the right places, but also so that we are in a position to assist with forage, because that's an issue of why people are moving them around. If we know where people are and can identify because we now have laws that allow for it on certain public lands. So it's trying to make this whole thing work better for the overall health of bees.
Right, I understand that. We have bees show up next to, some of our fields occasionally, and wake up in the middle of the morning, you're ready to spray, and all of a sudden, somebody moved in 100 hives, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Go ahead, Andy.
Rachel, just, kind of a follow-up again on the bees. There's been some challenges as those hives come in from out of state and getting the inspection centers. I've heard about it when it gets down to San Luis. It's a deal. So I'm just wondering, will this help with that to some degree?
So there's a couple of different things that are going on. And one is that we do have a pre-clearance certification that the Ag Commissioner or Secretary in the state of origin can do inspections and send it through. That's supposed to help them get through our inspection faster, but there have been a lot of issues with rejection of hives that are bringing in insects. They're dirty hives and they get rejected. They have to go for cleanup and come back. We are also doing a pilot this year with the state of North Dakota, where they are doing more and more overwintering indoors, which puts it in a different scenario for improved health and cleaner hives, so we're going to be doing inspections there, and they're sending their apiary staff here to understand our border station inspection process, because we all want to try to accelerate the movement of the hives in, because it's a compressed period of time, but we don't want the insects or the disease issues that come with it. So we're trying to work at all levels on this, but the inspection is still going to happen.
Are the penalties going to be enough to stop the placement in some of these areas that where they essentially get dropped off, you know, in the hills, in the you know, in different locations that could be a problem for spraying?
So the bill will allow for the pursuit of administrative civil penalties. In the past, it's been a problem because you're trying to get local law enforcement to actually pursue these bad actors. So this will allow for that hook now for the ag commissioners of the department to pursue that. So the hope is that the fines and the penalties will be steep enough to prevent that type of behavior.
I'm also assuming that this will allow us to see about the demise of the bees as well. Is that right? They'll be tracked to see the overall health of the colonies, so we can tell if the bee population is rebounding?
I think that might not have been the original driver of it, but that is a hope that we'll kind of better understand. If we better understand the movement of the bees and where they're being placed, we can understand some of the impacts that are hurting the colonies.
Thank you, Rachel. Any other questions? Very good. Thanks for coming in today and giving us the update.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go to Undersecretary Jenny Lester Moffett, and she's going to give us an update on the Global Climate Action Summit.
And
Jenny?
here's to a superstar, our undersecretary.
Yes.
As you already know, but I would not be doing my due diligence if I didn't call it out specifically.
I agree completely.
Well, thank you for that. Good morning, President Cameron, members of the board, and members in the audience. I'm glad to give an update on the Global Climate Action Summit. I feel like this is a take two from this spring when I might have not been as prepared to give this update, so here we go. We'll do a take two on that. Yeah, so September 12th through the 14th, about 6,000 people convened on San Francisco for the Global Climate Action Summit. This is a summit, it's a midway point really to the Paris Climate Agreement. So it's a chance for everyone who made commitments to the Paris Climate Agreement to take stock on where they are, renew commitments, maybe make newer commitments. It's also a chance for new folks, new companies, new businesses, new investors, new government entities to also come on board and make commitments as well. So that's the crux of this summit. But yeah, so folks from around the globe spoke at this summit. I chose a picture of someone who was speaking from one of the island nations, and she was a very powerful speaker about what this means for her and her nation and how individuals can take action. So the summit overall was, it covered a gamut, and I'll talk about overall some of the bigger announcements that were made. I don't know, have a number on how many total announcements were made, but it was a cluster of lots of different announcements that were made. But one thing I wanted to highlight first is the role that agriculture played at the summit. So you'll see here we have a panel of the food system, and of course Secretary Ross, our wonderful Secretary Ross, moderated this panel really with speakers from around the globe. So we have a speaker from Malawi, we have of course Judith Redmond from here in Yellow County, and then we have a speaker from New Zealand talking about the role that agriculture and the food system play in climate change and the opportunities for both mitigation, adaptation, and the importance of that role throughout. So, and then we also have Emily Rooney, who spoke on short-lived climate pollutants and the role that agriculture is playing, and the really impressive role that the dairy farmers are doing in innovating and really reducing methane through things like digesters and alternative manure management practices. So we had quite a few speakers. There was a lot of presence of agriculture at the summit. Of course, our own board member, Ashley, spoke at the Water Forum and spoke about the work that they're doing on water and groundwater recharge and all things water. So there was a lot of, there were about 350 different affiliated events that were going on at the same time as the summit, talking on all different things. These were two events that were happening as part of the main summit. So there's a very important role that agriculture played. I've heard time and time again how big this summit was for agriculture, and that many of these climate summits are talking about really important things, renewable energy, transportation, all those are really important things. But this was a really big chance for agriculture to shine in the limelight and show the opportunities, and we certainly stepped up and did that. As far as the overall challenges and commitments, there were 5 different buckets, if you will, of how all of the challenges and commitments were centered at the summit: healthy energy system, inclusive economic growth, sustainable communities, land and ocean stewardship, and then, of course, transformative climate investments. I'm going to walk through very high level some of the announcements that were made, but this press release that's in front of you guys has much more detail. You can read it at a later time. It's 9 pages. We'll make sure it also gets posted online, but it's the press release from the summit that has some of the higher level and more detail of some of the announcements that I'm going to mention at this point. So healthy energy systems. So really shifting, a global shift toward clean energy systems. 2 big things that were announced is this ZEV challenge, Zero Emission Vehicle Challenge. So 60 regional, state, city governments and multinational businesses committed to 100% zero emission targets for fleets by 2030. There was a renewable energy announcement where almost 400 global companies, healthcare providers, cities, states, and regions now have 100% renewable energy targets. These were just a few of many different announcements that came through with the healthy energy systems. Everywhere from individual companies made announcements, whether that is Lyft making announcements, Starbucks talking, or actually Salesforce. There was a lot talking about kind of that last mile and delivery. So things like when you're getting packages delivered, IKEA. That's what I was thinking. So IKEA made a big announcement on last mile and delivery of products and consumer goods as well. So these were kind of high level, but there were a lot of individual companies making announcements as well. For inclusive economic growth, this is really looking at climate leadership through what companies are doing. So a big thing was focused on the science-based targets. These are targets that are that companies can make that are in line with the Paris Climate Agreement. So 488 companies from 38 countries adopted emission reduction pathways that are in line with the Paris Climate Agreement. As you can see here, collectively, the companies represent $10 trillion in the global economy. There were over 39 food and beverage manufacturers, 11 food and staples retailers. This includes Danone, General Mills, Mars, McDonald's. Just to give an example of a few of these, so General Mills made an announcement of 28% reduction across their entire value chain. And this is entire value chain, so farm to fork to landfill. So big reductions there that they're committing to. Mars was actually one of the earlier companies to come out with an announcement, 27% reduction by 2025 and 67% reduction by 2050. McDonald's came out with an announcement of 36% reduction by 2030. Tyson Food, 30% reduction by 2030. Unilever is committing to 100% reduction in their Tier 1 and Tier 2 greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, and then Walmart at 18%. So some pretty significant commitments that were made at this summit. The summit was really about driving commitments, and certainly the companies stepped up and did that. And we certainly hope in the food and agriculture industry that as they do so, they're partnering with farmers and implementing those as well. Sustainable communities. A big announcement that was made was really centered around carbon neutrality. So over 70 big cities, home to 425 million residents, are now committed to carbon neutrality. That means they're going to be carbon neutral by 2050. This includes big cities like Accra and Los Angeles, Tokyo, Mexico City, and actually just the Monday of the summit, the state of California made a commitment for carbon neutrality by 2045. So certainly the state of California did not ask others to make commitments that also we were not also committed to making. 9,100 cities made commitments to climate action plans. So this is really the first step in the door, saying first we're going to have a plan on how we're going to address climate action. There were also commitments towards zero waste, energy efficiency, and many more that you can read about. Land and ocean stewardship, this is a hard slide to read, I apologize. This was a big one for agriculture, and then also in the food industry as well. So deforestation, over 100 supply chain actors made commitments toward halting deforestation. Palm oil is a big issue. Walmart, Unilever, and Ecuador stepped up to on action for deforestation-free palm oil. And then food waste, the Pacific Coast Collaborative, with which California, Oregon, Washington State, and Vancouver, along with many cities within those entities, within those states, made a commitment to 50% reduction in food waste by 2030. Important to announce also is over $1 billion in foundation investments were also announced in the summit, specifically tied toward land and ocean stewardship. Transformative investments. This is really looking at how do we transform the system, not just through what we're doing as businesses, what we're doing as governments, but also through the investor agenda. And so the investors actually pulled together what they call an investor agenda. Nearly 400 investors with over $32 trillion in assets stepped up to really start to accelerate what they're doing to drive and to scale up climate action through their financial flows. There was also an announcement on Climate Action 100 with investors really working specifically with companies that are looking to lower emissions. One big announcement, I'd be remiss to say that, in addition to the work that California did to make an announcement on our carbon neutrality, we also, at the Department of Food and Agriculture, in partnership with the country of France, announced a global soil health challenge. This challenge is a challenge for all of us in nations and sub-nations in partnership with businesses, with farmers, to include soils as part of our nationally determined contributions. So that's kind of the whole portfolio that we as government entities put together in our climate strategies, to include soils as part of that climate strategy. So we signed this and we announced this on Thursday at the summit. And the next day, the Netherlands joined on board as well. So as Secretary Ross mentioned, we'll continue to work throughout the fall. We have a lot of interest from other sub-nations, other nations, other organizations, other companies as well, really interested in getting and joining in this challenge. So we certainly wanted to make sure that that we also brought a commitment that we could really work together and announce as well. One other announcement that was made was the U.S. Climate Alliance, which is a coalition of many different U.S. states that have banded together on climate action. They made two announcements, one on short-lived climate pollutants, and then another one on our natural and working land strategies, which Secretary just mentioned a little bit about. California has been a leader in both short-lived climate pollutants and natural and working lands, so certainly as we partner with other states, they're really looking at us to see what we've been doing to provide them with resources. Of course, it's also a chance for us to learn from them as well about as we develop strategies for natural and working lands reduction. I would be remiss and not talk about the event that we had, and I know many of you that were there. I'm going to skim through and just show a couple pictures, but mostly I'm going to let the video and the Secretary's words in the video and the people that were interviewed in the video really talk about what was discussed at the summit. We brought over 120 people from throughout the world, actually, involved in agriculture together into Sonoma prior to the summit to discuss the role that agriculture can play in climate change. I think that energy was, not only was there was immense energy that was developed there, but it certainly carried throughout the entire summit. We visited farms. We visited Lauren Poncia's farm. We visited the Bordessa Dairy. We visited the Jackson Family Wines, La Crema Vineyard, really to see the work that they're doing on their farms and ranches through manure management, through soil management, through irrigation management. And then we had many panels discussing as well. We had a commodity panel talk about what's being done between the Almond Board and the National Corn Growers Association. Of course, we have to have wine there, so the Wine Institute as well. And we had, but first and foremost, and I'll back up because we have our panel of our farmers, and everything starts at the farm. And so the panel of farmers, I think, really set the stage for sure. And we had a great farmer from Jimmy Emmons from Oklahoma spoke, and I think he really knocked it out of the park. We had Jocelyn Bridson, who is our chair of our Environmental Farming Act, really talking about our farming panel, talking about the work that they're doing on specialty crops. And then, of course, the farmer from Malawi talking about the work that he's doing with shareholder farmers in Malawi. So I think that was definitely a highlight for me. I'll move it now to the video and let the guys take it away with this video.
The week of September 10th was a really big week for us here in California. It was the Global Climate Action Summit, which was hosted by the governor in San Francisco. But 2 days prior to that, on September 11th and 12th, the Department of Food and Agriculture hosted an event called Scaling Up Climate Smart Agriculture. It was a terrific event that had a diverse set of people that came together. We had over 100 scientists, farmers and ranchers, policymakers, big business, small business. It was a gathering of people who cared deeply about farming and ranching and the land and the opportunities that can be unlocked to help us address climate change.
This panel is going to talk about land conservation and climate smart planning.
We spent the first day with terrific panel discussions to really hear different perspectives and, more importantly, to hear everything that's being done here and across the country and around the world. But what really made this part of our call to action and stepping up progress on climate change was the farm tours. There is nothing better than meeting with farmers and ranchers on the land that they love and take care of every day.
This is a Pinot Noir block here, and Chardonnay is also grown at this ranch. We're looking at, what is carbon farming? Really, when it comes down to it, it's how you manage your cover crops, which can be done in a way that sequesters carbon or releases carbon. It's how do you run your tillage? Obviously, less tillage is going to keep more carbon in the ground.
Opportunities like this to get growers and the greater agricultural community out onto the land are critical. When we can come together and talk about conservation practices,
Security frauds, always a problem.
Love and take care of every day.
opportunities like this to get growers and the greater agricultural community out onto the land are critical. When we can come together and talk about conservation practices, see what it looks like on the land, and really discuss what it means for an ag producer to try new things, it can have a huge impact on helping people to consider new conservation practices in their own operations.
At Ocean Breeze, the dairy farm owned by the Pordessa family, we learned all about their carbon farm plan.
Let's get the carbon out of the air, into the biomass on farm. How can we capture more carbon on this landscape?
We also went to Stemple Creek Ranch. Lauren is a terrific advocate for really understanding what the soil can do to sequester carbon, improve productivity, water holding capacity. There's nothing better than being able to connect the words and the ideas and the concepts we talked about on the first day to in the field, what's really happening on the land, where the real action is. One of the things that made this event in Sonoma County so meaningful was that we had guests from across the country and around the world. We had a speaker from Africa, from Total Land Care in Malawi. We had guests from Canada. We had guests from other places, including the European Union.
We want to create abundance on the planet. We want to do it elegantly. We want to do it sustainably. But more importantly, it's going to be all working together if we can kind of understand that we don't have the luxury of getting it wrong. We have to get it right.
I've been farming for 40 years. I've been on this planet for 68 years, and I don't think we've ever faced as challenging a time, certainly in terms of our warming climate, greenhouse gas emissions. And this is the type of group, this is the type of visionaries and thinkers and doers who really can provide solutions.
What this summit has done for me is connect me with other people that have better ideas than we have. And we can take those ideas back home to our own business and really improve what we're doing.
For me, I work in the poorer countries, in the developing world, and I saw that the farmers, be it in the richer or the poorer countries, they face the same issues, they face the same challenges.
I feel also this is an opportunity for me as a take-home message to work with our local partners, local governments, see how we can support farmers.
I think I had two big takeaways from the conference today. Yeah, the first is everybody focusing on soil health and regenerative agriculture. You know, these are probably words that you wouldn't have heard at a conference 2 years ago, and now they're common to everybody's vocabulary. So there's great alignment there. And the second part is really the huge energy and enthusiasm around agriculture being part of the solution. And it's so refreshing to hear that.
And the most important thing that I want people to take away from here is that we're learning, we're excited about storing carbon in the soil. We have a lot more to learn, but there's a lot of positive results so far.
Thank you to Jenny and Josh and all of our staff. Thank you to our hosts. Thank you to our sponsors. Let's go out and make sure the world is a better place because of agriculture.
So thank you. And just to echo what Secretary said, Josh certainly put in a lot of work, so he deserves an immense kudos for the work that he put in. Plus, we had 2 interns who did great work over the summer as well, so absolutely.
I just want to say, because I got to be there in person, which was a great pleasure, and I just think you guys knocked it out of the park. It really exceeded my expectations. We presented well, it combined folks from across, but California came off really leading the charge and doing some great stuff. So that was a huge deal. I think people should know putting an event like that together is an enormous amount of work, and it was seamless. I mean, it really was done so well and so professionally, so kudos.
Yep. Thank you. I agree. I was able to be a part of that, and hats off to both of you for putting it together and running so smoothly, and really, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was well worth the time, so thank you both. Thank you, Jenny. Okay, our next presentation, Specialty Crop Block Grant Program. Stephen Teixeira, CDFA Office of Grants Administration. Stephen Teixeira is a part of the management team for CDFA's Office of Grant Administration and is a manager for the California Specialty Crop Block Grant Program. So welcome.
I know it is a tongue twister, but it's a great program, and Stephen and Crystal and everybody does a super job.
You get Teixeira right, so I mean, I'm thrilled by that, so, because it never happens. Thank you again. Yeah, my name is Stephen Teixeira. I'm the California coordinator for the Specialty Crop Block Grant Program and the Specialty Crop Multi-State Program. So I'm just going to give a broad overview of our block grant program. First, this is a program that enhances the competitiveness of California specialty crops, and those include fruits, vegetables, tree nuts, dried fruits, horticulture and nursery crops, also floriculture, and medicinal herbs and spices. So, we conduct an annual solicitation that begins with the publication of a request for concept proposals in the fall. We are actively soliciting applications right now for the program. It's a 2-phase process. In the first phase, it's a concept proposal, or sort of a summary of a project with a very limited budget. And from those concept proposals, we have an invitation-only grant proposal. We have a technical review committee that reviews and assesses the merits of the proposals. And those with the highest scores are invited to submit a full proposal, and that proposal will become what we submit to USDA in spring. So a number of funding categories where we're soliciting proposals. First is California Grown Promotion. The block grant is a marketing program, but we do have various areas, and California Grown Promotion is our marketing and promotion category. We also have a focus on access to nutrition education, equipping current and next generation specialty crop farmers. This is basically the training, environmental stewardship and conservation, plant health and pest management, and then food safety. And for food safety, we partner with the Center for Produce Safety. They do a separate solicitation that runs in parallel to ours. Their technical panel makes assessments and they make recommendations to us for proposals that we'll include in our request to USDA. All right. So each funding category within it has multiple program priorities, and I'm going to talk about the process that we have to get to those priorities. So first, they all are based on Ag Vision 2030. In 2015, we did an internal review, and we communicated with some of the members of our technical review committee to try and update some of those, or make sure that we were articulating those as best we could in the content of our request for proposals. We also did a public comment period in 2016, and we refined those a little further. And then we do internal and external review annually. We get feedback from the science advisor to the secretary on the environmental stewardship and conservation priorities, and then the Buy California Marketing Agreement also gives us feedback on, it helps set the priorities for the California Grown Promotion funding category. So I want to talk about some of the innovations. I mentioned that we had done an assessment of the program priorities in 2015. One big element that came out of that was increased funding to support beginning and socially disadvantaged farmers and underserved communities. So since then, we've had 29 grants totaling $6.2 million for projects that benefit beginning and socially disadvantaged farmers, and 29 grants for $7.6 million for projects that benefit underserved communities. The second innovation I'll talk about is fixed amount awards. This is a form of federal award that is based more on achieving outcomes than it is on strict adherence to a budget. So it has less paperwork, less reporting requirements, and greater flexibility for our subrecipients to accomplish the goals of their projects. We have used this as a target for specific issues that are affecting California specialty crop agriculture, and those include Food Safety Modernization Act, adaptation to drought, and then workforce and labor challenges. So I mentioned we are currently accepting applications. We started on September 24th, and we're expecting to award up to $22 million for projects, and that'll be in the fall of next year. So continuing with some data we've received in the 11 years of the program, 2,812 concepts, 1,380 of those were advanced to the grant proposal phase where they submitted a full proposal to us. We've awarded 672 grants for $186 million. There are 344 research projects and 93 total that benefit socially disadvantaged farmers. And in 2015, I mentioned that we had made some changes. One of those was to put a greater emphasis on matching funds. This program does not require federal cost share, and the state of California doesn't require it. However, there is a lot of external industry support for the program. We wanted to make sure that we were capturing that. So since 2018, $17.8 million in matching funds, none of it required. So after breaking down the numbers, I thought I'd just go ahead and give a couple of success stories from the program. In 2013, with a $150,000 grant from Block Grant, the Center for Produce Safety, in partnership with the University of Arizona, developed a risk-based approach for sampling of irrigation waters used for production of produce to minimize the risk of crop contamination by foodborne bacteria. The team developed an app as an interface to their findings to help the produce industry better predict risk-based sampling strategies for water quality. There were 606 active users in the first year after release. Additionally, survey results indicated that between 67 and 82% of stakeholders would be willing to change their sampling protocol and use the risk assessment tool to aid in irrigation water control assessment. All right, in 2016, the California Olive Oil Commission began a $357,000 project to increase sales of California-grown olive oil. At the end of 2017, with about 12% of the project complete, the California Olive Oil Commission reported that sales of California-grown olive oil had increased from $48.6 million to $57.3 million. And they're well on their way to their final goal of $63 million in increased sales by 2019. In November 2016, at the start of the project, California's share of olive oil sales was 5.8%, and that has now increased to approximately 7%. In 2013, the Hoopa Valley Tribe started a $315,000 grant to provide the Hoopa and surrounding communities access to specialty crops. The Hoopa Valley Reservation is located in a small rural town that had little access to fresh, healthy produce and a population with high rates of obesity and diabetes. Throughout the project, 15 farmers markets with nearly 20 market booths featuring specialty crops were established. So survey results showed a 5% increase in knowledge and use of California specialty crops by the Hoopa community and surrounding communities. The project created 20 successful farms that grow and produce California specialty crops, and 5 of those farms have been with the project from the start and now oversee the farmers market established by the project. All right. In 2014, the Noyo Food Forest began a $230,000 grant to inspire youth in the Fort Bragg area to pursue careers in the specialty crop industry, and also increase utilization of local specialty crops in Fort Bragg school cafeterias. They had 21 interns complete the program. 25% expressed interest in pursuing an agricultural career. The interns produced over 800 pounds of specialty crops for programs at local schools. And they also had a special needs student who completed the program and has flourished. He's been able to work independently in the garden and at the farmer's market. So that's the overview. Would certainly welcome questions. I'll also make my pitch. I mentioned that we are accepting applications. We're also accepting applications for technical reviewers. So anyone who has an interest is welcome to come talk to me about that. So with that out of the way.
All right. Go ahead.
Steve, can you talk about a little bit in regards to Farm Bill funding and how, since the Farm Bill's expired, what's the plan moving forward?
Yeah, what's your plan, Stephen?
I'm going to open a fruit stand. I hope we can make about $21 million a year. Should be good to go. So technically, the provisions of the Farm Bill include a continuation of this program at current levels from 2018 and beyond. However, I'd sleep a little easier if we had a Farm Bill passed, and that's also conditional upon there being funding and no surprise changes in the budget. So in concept, on paper, there should be continued funding for the program. How solid that is uncertain. So.
But we continue our process.
Yes, of course. So I do have a counterpart, USDA. They are proceeding, and so we're proceeding. The one challenge for us would be any changes to the program that happen as a result of a Farm Bill happening sometime during our solicitation process. That happened in 2014, where there were some changes that accompanied the Farm Bill, areas that were emphasized, and that did affect some of the proposals that we would have liked to have seen funded, but they became unallowed because of changes that happened after we basically concluded our solicitation and then a Farm Bill was enacted.
Well, Stephen, it's refreshing to hear that you're outcome driven and you're bent on reducing paperwork and reporting. But so that's always great to hear. Go ahead, Nancy.
I had a question along that line. Just as an estimate, approximately how big is the application form? How many pages?
Okay, so well, it's all electronic. So I suppose in terms of paper, but the concept proposal, if you were to complete an application, there's one attachment. You have to give us sort of an overview of your proposed budget. The questionnaire completed plus a budget is typically around 3 to 5 pages. We want to keep it accessible at that phase. At the second phase, it's quite a bit more, somewhere between 8 and, we sometimes get a lot. If you were to provide the minimum number of attachments and complete an application, somewhere between about 8 and 15 pages. We just sometimes get, you include like resumes and CVs, or sometimes people will provide research to support their application, then you can get into 40, 50, 60 pages. But to get by would be about a minimum of about 8 pages. Sure.
Well, and I have to say, if I could add, I think the our Office of Grants Administration has done an amazing job in terms of here's the federal requirements and being able to say here's how we can streamline in terms of how best to apply in terms of meeting their key questions. So.
Yeah. And they do extensive workshops and webinars, and the staff is extremely helpful. And they've really, every year, they do a really deep dive to look at what else could we do better. They're always looking at how can we do better, and I think you see some of the changes they've done really reflects the thoughtfulness that has gone into this.
Thank you so much for the social disadvantage piece of it. 3 questions, kind of. The
Okay.
number one is, urban farming, it's a good thing
Mhm.
to improve, okay, so I'll do that. The second one is, if one sits on a board of one of the nonprofits, can it still be on your technical and only recruits from that one piece?
So, yeah, first question, we do include language about urban farming in that equipping current and next generation specialty crop farmers funding category. That is one of the priorities within it. And it is an area where we hope to, we're starting to get to it, and we need to expand. So that is a priority for us. We've looked at really having trainings in more urban areas. We don't seem to have a lot of reach in Los Angeles County, as an example. So that's something that we've emphasized this year and in years past, trying to make that headway. We do have some projects, I couldn't give you numbers offhand, focused on urban farming. And yes, in response to the second question, you can be an applicant and also be a reviewer. We do have a pretty nuanced process in terms of making sure that there's a recusal and an exemption so that you wouldn't be in a position, no one would be in a position to influence. Yeah. All right, fantastic. That counts, that's official.
So I have a kind of a follow-up to the previous questions. What type of reporting requirements are required after the grant has been administered? Does it go on for years, the reporting requirements, or is that fairly streamlined?
Yeah, so we have, there are two levels of requirements. We do, with the fixed amount awards, we do the lesser of them. So federally, there would be, program is 2.5 years. And then we submit in that third year to USDA. We also submit to them on an annual basis. So for the fixed amount awards, we only have people submit reporting on an annual basis so that we can submit then to USDA. For everything else, we have it on a 6-month review process, or where they're submitting reports to us biannually. The reason for that is that that's sort of a tool for us. We do especially with first-time recipients or newer organizations to the program or newer organizations to federal funding. We want to make sure that we are in a position to assist them if they're falling behind. And we have a work plan. If we look at that first 6-month report and they're well off their work plan, or that 1-year report and they're well off their work plan, we want to be able to go out and assist them, make sure that they're still in compliance. So it's reports every 6 months throughout the duration, that 2.5 years. And then we do invoicing on a not less than quarterly basis. So, and we have, there are USDA requirements for what the content of that report is. We do give a template that's completed, and it includes guidance or suggestions. And then we have individual analysts who are responsible for each of the programs, and they'll work with an applicant that needs assistance on that. It is burdensome. I mean, that's one of the challenges, is once someone gets the funding, having the capacity to actually execute the project and be responsible for the administration of those federal funds. And that's one of the things that our staff focus on, is giving that the assistance that's necessary for success there.
Stephen, one other question. Do you give grants do you have repeat, like ongoing grants that continue to provide funding for a special project, or is it all new funding each year?
It is. We do have a number that are continuing. There's no set aside, which is to say that if you had a project, even if it were very successful, it wouldn't guarantee that you would be able to build on that project. So you would apply and compete, go through the competitive process to get continued funding. Yes, we have multiples where a project starts and it expands or builds upon the previous funding. So there's no requirement that it be new funding on each time.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate the report.
My pleasure. Thank you again.
All right, we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to invite Tom Nassif from Western Growers up to the podium. Tom is president and CEO of Western Growers and has led the organization for more than 16 years. As a former U.S. ambassador and an official in the Reagan administration, Tom's broad and distinguished leadership experience has served California agriculture industry and Western growers well. So Tom, great to see you here.
Thank you.
Give you the floor.
Very nice to see you. Secretary Ross, Mr. President, members of the board, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate being invited to talk a little bit about Western Growers. Always happy to do that. Some of you don't know me at all. Some of you I've worked with before. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about my background and tell you what Western Growers actually does. I started off as an agricultural labor lawyer representing farmers out in the Imperial Valley and some in Arizona and then throughout California by the time I finished practicing law. And I used to introduce myself at bar meetings as being the lawyer who lost the very first case before the Agricultural Labor Relations Board in the state of California in 1975 because Governor Brown, he invited a few of us up to Sacramento to his office here. And he had Cesar Chavez and some of the UFW there, and he had some of our lawyers. And I wasn't with Western Growers at the time, but the president of Western Growers was there, and we had sort of a mock hearing where it was predestined that the UFW would win the case, and we all went along with that. And I went on to, and I've thanked the governor so many times for making me a career. He used to always call me and call me to Sacramento or even go to some of my negotiations with the union when we were negotiating contracts. And he was irritated that I wasn't signing contracts fast enough, and he was putting a lot of pressure on me to do so. And then when he became governor again for this last two terms, I reminded him of how much money he made me. And that really piqued him at the time when he thought what he'd done. I said, we used to call this the Agricultural Labor Lawyers Relief Act of 1975 because we had so much business. It created a brand new industry for lawyers. So I've worked with the governor quite a bit on the ag labor stuff. At the time, Western Growers had made a deal with him to go ahead and support it. I was representing the Imperial Valley Growers Association, and so I was the only one in ag who actually testified against the bill. But it was a wonderful experience. I learned a lot about what was going on. You know, being an ag labor lawyer, you have to know what's going on in ag. You have to know what the workers do. You have to know what their rights are. You're negotiating contracts, so you have to understand what means something and what doesn't mean something, what's important. And so I cut my teeth negotiating a lot of contracts, which we signed, and we had a very good relationship with the union. But when it came down to renegotiating those contracts, the union had taken a little different tact as to what they wanted to do, and we ended up having a pretty difficult strike situation out in the Imperial Valley. But then sometimes toward the end of that time, I was invited by a friend of mine to come and meet with the Secretary of Labor designate when President Reagan was first elected. So I was in Washington for the inauguration of President Reagan with some of my farm friends and clients. I was invited by the Secretary of Labor designate at the time to the first cabinet meeting to meet with him about what position I would like. Well, I had no idea. I'd never been to Washington before. I wasn't really sure what they did. I was mainly doing state labor law, not NLRB stuff. And I really couldn't tell him what I wanted. I said, I came for the inauguration. I didn't come looking for a job, and I'd just become a partner in a fairly substantial law firm in San Diego, so I was anxious to start, making a real living for a change, not going to government. But I ended up going back and interviewing and was hired as the deputy chief of protocol for the White House. So first thing I did is I went to the library and checked out a book so I could find out what the Office of Protocol did. I had absolutely no idea what job I'd accepted. But it turned out that I got a chance to meet with, everybody and anybody in the world who wanted to meet with President Reagan at the time. So every head of state and every head of government came to Washington, wanted to meet the new president of the United States, and I was the guy who, after he spent a day with him or so, he'd say, okay, here's the plane, here's the head of state. You got 7 days or 6 days or whatever days they wanted, take them wherever they want. So I thought, okay, fine. So we'd ask the head of state where they wanted to go, and they'd tell us, I want to go to New York, I want to go to Houston, I want to see the space program, I want to go to California. Indira Gandhi wanted to go to Hawaii, and she donated an elephant to our zoo there in Hawaii. So you get a chance to actually see these people as real people. I met with Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin, who signed the peace agreements, the Camp David Accords. It was just amazing to see these people in person. But the sad thing is that so many of them were assassinated within the years after they came. It was really very tragic. Anwar Sadat was assassinated shortly after his first state visit to the United States. Indira Gandhi was assassinated. The president of Pakistan was assassinated, and he happened to be in a plane with our ambassador to Pakistan at the time. It had a bomb on it from his own people trying to get rid of him. So while these are wonderful experiences to meet these people and see the human side of them, then you also have to engage in the tragedy of seeing these people who have dedicated their lives to their countries and then seeing them being assassinated by someone who's not going to gain anything necessarily from that, because the world goes on and every country continues to go on. But to sit in an airplane with Indira Gandhi and her son and her daughter-in-law and her grandkids and talk about the kids, it was just remarkable. But a lot of the times they figured I was CIA. They said, you know, this guy's not a cookie pusher. He's not protocol. He's CIA. So they had to watch what they said in front of me. And of course, I wasn't. And I wasn't listening to what they said to try and report it back to the Department of State. But the most interesting one, I think, was the Marcoses, where Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos come to meet the president. It's the first time I had to wear a Kevlar vest, bulletproof vest, when I went to the airport to meet them was during that visit. But they were absolutely sure I was with the CIA. So they would continually invite me into their suite. And they'd say, you know, next time you speak to the president, I'd like you to tell him the following. And I said, well, you know, we're not on speaking terms. I work for the government. I'm not on speaking terms with the president. They said, we know, Tom. Okay, this is what I want you to say. And then one day I'd sit in a car with Imelda Marcos, the next day with Ferdinand Marcos, and they'd keep filling with stuff. And I couldn't convince them that I was just a radio officer in charge of protocol and take care of their visits. But all these experiences were wonderful. I mean, practicing ag labor law, being a lawyer, meeting with people from around the world was quite an adventure and quite an education. And I've kind of thought that if I can do that, if I can meet people from around the world, if I can represent agriculture in some very difficult strike situations and union negotiations, and I might be qualified to represent agriculture as president of the Western Growers Association. Now, I had no idea that path would come to me. I wasn't looking for it. Didn't really want the job when I was offered the job. But I had a deep and abiding love for agriculture because, you know, when you're in a small town like El Centro, California, your best friends are your clients and their kids are friends with your kids. So, you know, it's not just a legal relationship, it's a personal relationship. So you get to know them, you get to love them and their families, and of course you want to help them succeed in what they do. So I started at Western Growers 16 years ago. And I thought to myself, well, you know, what can we possibly do at Western Growers that isn't being done? But, you know, my family, my father was an immigrant, he came from Lebanon, from the Middle East, so I understand what people mean when they say that a camel was designed by a committee, because I kind of think that, you know, it must have been camels and zebras and leopards and giraffes that created Western Growers, because we are such an odd bunch. There is no association, I don't think, in the world that does what we do. Most people are very surprised that, you know, of our close to 500 employees now, that the majority of them work in health care and health insurance. We're a health insurance company, multi-employer welfare arrangement. And for those people who don't want to go through a middleman that are large enough to be self-insured, we're their back room. So that's where most of our focus is. But what gets the publicity, of course, is the trade association activities. We actually have broker-dealer's license. We can buy and sell stock for our own portfolio and for members and and employees who want someone to manage their portfolio. You know, we have a bunch of companies in agriculture that come together and put their 401k programs together, and we manage that portfolio, and we bring in all the Wall Street firms because we've got a lot of them putting their money in, so it's a big enough amount of money to get the Wall Street guys to come out, talk about large cap, small cap, mid cap, you know, bonds, cash, and cash equivalents. And that's just a part of what we do. So we do some stuff on the labor side still, especially on the H-2A. If somebody wants to have H-2A, they want to have employees coming from under a visa. We help them do that. We have several attorneys in our offices. And we sell insurance. I mean, we don't just sell our own health insurance, we use insurance brokers, so workers' comp, property and casualty, you name it. We do all of those kinds of things. And why do we do all of these things? We do them because these are things our members say they need. And they want to be able to go to a one-stop shop and get all their insurance needs taken care of, just like we're taking care on the government affairs side. We've got offices throughout California, Arizona, Washington, D.C. We opened our Washington, D.C. office quite a while ago. We have 3 people there. And it gave us, on-time reporting about what's going on and an absolute wonderful venue for meeting with members of the legislature on both sides of the aisle. And believe me, you have to work, and we always do work on both sides of the aisle. You need support from everybody if you've got the right piece of legislation you're trying to pass or stop, whatever the case may be. So that's been very, very valuable to us. It's gotten us in on the Farm Bill. When I came to work at Western Growers, especially crops weren't in the Farm Bill. And I didn't really know much about the Farm Bill anyway. So I started asking some questions, and I said, well, why aren't we in the Farm Bill? They say, well, there's a program, a block grant program, but that's about it. And they do some market, some market access programs, but there's really not that much. And I said, well, it seems to me that if the federal government wants to invest in agriculture, that they ought to look at our industry. But the difference is, we don't want subsidies. Other people want the subsidies. That's how they're able to keep in business. And obviously, the government gives them subsidies because all the other countries are giving agriculture subsidies. So how do you compete on a world stage? How do you export? How do you even get people to buy domestic products if the other ones subsidize so heavily that you can't financially compete with them? So I had a lobbyist in Washington, D.C., and we sat down to write the Specialty Crop Competitiveness Act. And when we did it, we went to a lot of the associations from around the country who thought we were crazy, and I was the new kid on the block, didn't know what I was doing, and they were the experts, and they said, that's a great idea, but we'll take it from here. Well, Karen knows my personality. That's not how I work. So we went ahead drafting a bill that our former Secretary of CDFA and Secretary of Agriculture, Ann Veneman, said would never see the light of day. Everybody said it wouldn't. We got it passed unanimously in the House and in the Senate in 1 year. So we introduced it in 2002, and it passed in 2003. And the specialty crop industry, with a strong specialty crop block grant program, was in there. But the thing that some of our friends in other industries, agriculture, who get the subsidies, didn't like was the fact that we didn't want subsidies. We wanted the market to determine whether or not you should be in business or not. And we always felt, well, if you can't afford to be a farmer, don't be a farmer, be something else. And if you can be a farmer, then don't rely on somebody else to make it possible. We don't begrudge subsidies. We understand why they're there for some of the other crops, but that's not the way we wanted it. And so it was adapted pretty quickly when people realized we weren't asking for handouts. So we've gotten very involved in the Farm Bill. There are 3 of us in the country who were on the sort of on the co-chairs of the Farm Bill Alliance. It was Mike Stewart from Florida and John Killing from Washington, D.C., National Potatoes, and myself. So we've been working on these farm bills every year, and we're still working on this one because it expires this month, and we're trying to get some things done. We've got some headway. One of the things we wanted to do was we wanted to get some more assistance for things like technology and mechanization and water quality. I mean, we know that the federal government is not capable of giving us an immigration bill, no matter how many times it's tried, because nobody wants to be bipartisan, unfortunately, and that's what it takes. You cannot have a partisan, one-party bill. Impossible. So we try and say, okay, well, why don't you put some money into research on mechanization? Because what we did was, we said, look, we're not going to get this solved through legislation. Let's do what we can to advance technology. So we opened a center in Salinas called the Western Growers Center for Innovation and Technology, and it's an incubator. And we were hoping at the maximum we'd have some 30, 35 tenants in a very small, small office, and we've got something like 53 now. It's amazing, and the technology that's being developed. And our focus was, let's make a smaller footprint on the planet. Let's find technology that reduces our reliance on natural resources, like water, and on human resources, which are labor. And that's where we've tried to focus, although we've seen some technologies that are wonderful. So we put our money where our mouth was. We developed a fund, too, that we put a lot of money into to help these startups get going, get started, and introduce them. And we have our farmers meet with them, take them out, do pilot programs on the ranches to see whether or not it's really commercially viable. Because maybe you've got a great idea, but nobody wants to buy it. So find out there's something that works, that really answers the question, can you solve the following problem? And if you can do that, even if it takes 2 or 3 of you to get together, it's worth it. And we've worked with UC Davis and San Luis Obispo and a lot of schools from around the country trying to do this. And it's been extremely successful and extremely well served. I don't spend much time on state issues, but our experts out there, Dave Puglia and Matthew Allen, are sitting there. If you have any state questions that are really difficult or embarrassing, they'd be happy to respond to those. But I do a lot of work on the federal side that bleeds over into what we do. And my main focus has really been on immigration. It's one of those things that you're not sure you'll ever get anything done, but you can't stop trying. It's just too important. And I'm kind of unusual in that my main focus has been on protecting the workers, whereas that's not where the legislation is. The legislation isn't about protecting the workers. The legislation is about punishing the workers. And we keep saying, why do you want to punish people who are doing jobs nobody else in the world would do for us? They're absolutely essential if we want to have a reliable, safe domestic food supply. Why would you do that? Well, because they've committed a crime. We're people of laws. Well, we're human beings too, aren't we? And aren't they? And I've gone so far as in interviews to say, they're not just essential, they are saviors to our industry. We could not be the powerhouse we are in the world in agriculture and in fresh produce. I meet with guys who represent cotton or rice or corn or wheat, and I've got 350, 400 different commodities that we represent. And California is the leader in so many of them. We really, truly are feeding the world fresh produce, the safest and the best in the world. And what do we need? We need somebody to harvest those crops, or we need technology that obviates the need for so much manual labor. So we said, look, okay, 2013, Senator Feinstein, who's come under a lot of criticism from the Democrats and the Republicans, called a number of us into her office. At the time, President Obama was in the White House, and Democrats had the Senate, and the Republicans had the House. And this bill started in the Senate, and we formed a coalition in Washington that made up of all of agriculture from around the country to negotiate some sort of an immigration bill. And what we said is, we don't want to be negotiating with any of the other industries. We want to negotiate agriculture separate because we're so different than the food service industry or the construction industry. We have so many migrant seasonal workers. That's just not the case so much in some of these other industries. So they negotiated all the other industries with certain senators, and then we negotiated with senators that were interested in solving the problem from both sides of the aisle, and it was in Senator Feinstein's office. And we had worker advocates there, including the United Farm Workers Union. Artie Rodriguez was there, and his folks, and a couple of other worker advocate groups. And we had our coalition, and we did our damnedest to try and get something passed. And then finally we reached impasse, as you might imagine, and couldn't quite get to where we needed to be. And I got a call from Senator Feinstein. She said, can you do anything to revive these discussions? And I said, well, I think we ought to start these discussions differently than we've been doing them. I said, why don't you just let me sit across the table one-on-one with Arturo Rodriguez. I've dealt with the union for many, many years. I'm very familiar with them, and they're familiar with me. And we'll sit down without any senators, any staff outside of Washington, D.C., and let us see if we can resolve the major issues. So they invited us to a union office in L.A., and I went there, and I had the staff person with me who was a wonderful attorney and immigration lawyer, and Artie Rodriguez was there with one of his vice presidents who's very competent in the area of negotiations, and we just hammered out an agreement. And of course, the main agreement was on wages, and we hammered it out. Well, that just broke the dam. I mean, they just, all of a sudden, everything got negotiated. All the other things we were talking about got negotiated. Now, was it a perfect bill for the union or for us? No, it wasn't. But we had to make concessions if we wanted to get a bill. And we knew that there were still some things we could do in the House, you know, that we didn't maybe like the cap was way too small for what the industry needed. We thought we'd get some better treatment in the House. Well, we were mistaken. We got to the House, and all the House wanted to do again was punish the workers and not give them anything called amnesty. Well, when you define amnesty as being a basic human being and treating people like they're people and not objects, yeah, everything's amnesty. The Goodlatte bill is amnesty. And they said, no, we won't give you any amnesty. Well, isn't it amnesty if you say all these illegals can become guest workers without any fine or any imprisonment or for breaking the law? Sure, that's amnesty. Is it a good thing? Sure, it's a good thing. And if I thought for a minute, those workers that we have, and California's loaded with people with false documents, would agree and say, yes, I'm here illegally, my wife's here illegally, my kids were born here, I'm willing to see them deported, and I will go back, I'll leave the country and try and become a guest worker and come in on a visa to do seasonal work. If I thought, and if our members who employ them thought they would do that, we would say, okay, that's a solution. Make them H-2C workers. But we know better. We have a perfect and contemporary example, and that's DACA. Here, all these young people said, okay, we were early childhood arrivals. You told us we could get a deal and we wouldn't have to be deported. We've been living in the shadows, worrying about all this all the time. And what happened to them? They got nothing. Why? Partisanship. Partisanship, pure and simple. Senate couldn't pass it, House couldn't pass it, nobody could pass it. So if they were going to pass DACA, which should have been simple, how are they going to pass immigration reform? And on top of it, they add E-Verify, electronic verification, to this whole scenario. And not just for agriculture. Here's an ag immigration bill that pulls every industry in the country under E-Verify without them negotiating any immigration reform. Does that make any sense? Why would somebody say, sure, I'll take E-Verify and forget about immigration reform so we have an adequate workforce. Just work with the farmers only. Doesn't make sense. Does it make sense for us to say, yes, we want E-Verify without an adequate fix? No. We're not against E-Verify. We don't want illegal people in the country working. We want a legal workforce. Find us a way to make them legal. If you don't want them to be citizens, if you don't want them to be legal permanent residents, do something. Give them work permits so that they're allowed to stay and we can make a transition and they can make a transition. Protect their families. Don't deport their families, for goodness sake. Nobody's going to stand up and say yes to that. So you're perpetuating what's been a problem. People living in the statute, paying their taxes. They all get checks. They all pay their taxes, and they pay their Social Security, and they get nothing out of Social Security. And they're terrified to use the health insurance. I mean, why does our company predominantly have health insurance? Because that's what our farmers want. They want health insurance for their farm workers and themselves. They're so frightened, they don't even use the insurance. They go to urgent care or emergency wards to get treated. See, this to me just makes no sense. So when I hear these people say, come on, you know, you can't get everything you want, get the rest of it in the Senate. All right, that might make some logic, although I tried that in 2013, didn't work. But the one thing I knew is this: the Senate in election year is not going to take up E-Verify or ag immigration reform. Why would they? So if you're not going to get a bill passed, there's not going to be a conference between the House and the Senate that results in an immigration reform bill, why give up the main thing that you're afraid of, and that's electronic verification, without an immigration fix that gives you a legal and adequate workforce? Why would you do that? Well, Bob Goodlatte's retiring, and, you know, it's kind of what he wanted to do, and, you know, we'd like to send him off with a bill in his name. And I said, my Lord God, save me. If that's how our government is working, we want a going-away president for Bob Goodlatte that screws Western agriculture. No, thank you. I'm not going to that party. But that's what they talked about. Then they said, well, look, this is all you can get the rest in the Senate. Okay, we just went through that. Nothing's going to happen in the Senate, yet they're still trying to get the Goodlatte bill attached to other legislation, must-pass legislation. For what? For nothing. I said, just wait. 2019, we'll have a new Congress. Let's see how we work with the new Congress. Maybe we'll have people that aren't quite so crazy about punishing people and have a little heart and realize what a blessing, what a value our farm workers are to us. Well, now I'm under attack. USA Farm, Numbers USA and FAIR, both anti-immigration groups, are attacking me personally. They're going on the internet. I'm getting anonymous emails saying, we know where you live, you're not in the shadows, we're going to do everything possible to make you pay for this. You're not a patriot, you're not an American, you want illegals coming in the country, you want to lose American jobs. Please, you know, read the text. Look at what we're saying. No. Instead, they do the personal attacks. What for? What do you gain by that? You think you're going to intimidate me? I'm too old to be intimidated, okay? I'm too dumb to be intimidated. I just want to do what's fair, but it's not easy to accomplish. And it's not easy to accomplish with Republicans, it's not easy to accomplish with the Democrats. And believe me, I went to my friends on the other side of the aisle and said, look, you know, why don't we get some good Dems and some good Republicans who really want to work this out, and let's come up with our own bill. No. No successes for this administration. And when the Republicans are not in power, they don't want success for the other administration. They didn't want Obama to be successful. I mean, it's tragic that that's the way the government works, but that's what we've been seeing. The other thing that's been occupying a lot of my time recently are the trade agreements. I'm also on the Agricultural Policy Advisory Group. We actually are advisors for the Secretary of Agriculture and the U.S. Trade Representative on international trade agreements. So we chimed in on China. China's a huge export market for us. We're getting killed in this trade tariff because they went right after agriculture. They knew that was a Achilles heel for us. And they knew we'd be yelling and screaming to get something done, and we have. But nothing's been done yet on China. It's not that we don't agree that it has to be done, because they are the biggest cheaters in the world. I've been to China. I've talked to farmers out in the countryside. Well, where do these roads come from? Well, the government builds them. Where does the water come from? Well, the government gives it to us. Where does the fertilizer come from? Well, the government gives it to us. I said, well, but how much tax do you pay? Oh, we don't pay any tax. Well, isn't that an illegal subsidy? I mean, how do you compete with that in a world market? And then they manipulate their currency. So you add the tariffs, and I brought this up to APAC. I said, look, we have to say something about currency manipulation. We can't just talk about trade, because you impose a tariff on China, and then they change the value of their currency. So it doesn't have any impact on their people at all. And they do that with impunity. And nobody calls them on the carpet because it's China. They hold us hold a lot of our debt. They could bankrupt us if they called in all their bonds. So, not an easy thing. Korea, we said Korea, the U.S.-Korea agreement was just fine, don't screw it up. And they didn't. Okay, they didn't. Then came NAFTA, and NAFTA, of course, you know what's happened on NAFTA. It's now USMCA. United States, Mexico, Canada agreement. I was on calls all week just talking about the bilateral between Mexico and the United States that we were pretty close to getting done. We were giving them comments. But in the comments, we said, but we need Canada. Canada's our #1 trading partner. You can't let Canada go. You know, we didn't want changes in NAFTA in the first place. It didn't help every commodity, but it helped most of them. So I said, okay, we heard you. Canada's in. So now we have an agreement. Thank God we do. Very important to get those 2 agreements done. So now we're left with China and what we're going to do about China. And that's going to be very important. Anyway, those are some areas that I'm spending a lot of my time on. There are other areas, obviously. Food safety has just been a huge issue for us. I mean, I cut my teeth on food safety issues because early on we had the spinach outbreak, and then all of a sudden I had to stand in front of reporters from all over the country and explain what we were going to do about it. And I had no idea what I was talking about. I knew the words. I knew how to pronounce them and put them in a sentence, but I really didn't know what I was saying about what we were going to do. And one of the reporters just stood up and said, how are you going to solve this problem? You grow your stuff outside, in the dirt, with insects and animals going through your fields and birds flying over your fields. How are you going to solve this problem? Well, they were right. It's not easy. You know, you try and solve it in the field with, you know, as much sanitary as you can, and looking for animal trails in the fields so you don't harvest that area. You do something with the wash in the processing plant so it doesn't get in the bag salads. You try and tell the handlers and the retailers when they get it how to handle it. The homemaker, what to do, how you have to wash everything regardless of what it says. And you can't take a cantaloupe out of the field and then cut it in half and then eat it and think, well, I don't eat the outside. The inside's fine. Well, the knife just cut through the outside. And if there was a pathogen on there, it got that pathogen into the heart of the cantaloupe. So you have to be very, very careful about these things. But E. coli is a naturally occurring pathogen. It's on this table. It's on your table. It's around all the time. So many of these pathogens are. But they're not lethal unless they're in certain existence, certain amount of it. And then it can be very lethal. And it has been. It's tragic. I mean, what farmer wants his product recalled because they poisoned somebody? Nobody. And if you've got a way to solve that, wouldn't you do it? Of course you'd do it. You're going to go out of business. But the technology for discovering the pathogens has so outpaced the science for solving the problem that we're all of a sudden discovering all kinds of things we didn't know existed before. It isn't that this is new. It's just that we couldn't test for it. We couldn't determine it. Now we can. And so we're seeing more and more and more of it. And believe me, we're knee-deep in it. We created the California Leafy Green Agreement with help from USDA. And AG was secretary at the time. We created the Arizona Leafy Green Agreement. It was the precursor to the federal legislation on food safety. And believe me, there were a lot of states in this country didn't want any part of it because we had very strict standards. And they said, that's California's problem. We don't want it in our state. And we paid for it all ourselves. Anything the government, if they come out and inspect, we pay for it. We pay for everything. It's our responsibility. We'll take control of it. And we had some retailers who said, or processors and producers who said, I'm not going to join that thing and pay all that money and have all those inspections. And I said, really? And the big international companies. So I called a couple of retailers and said, well, you know what? X company says they're not going to sign on to this. They said, oh, really? 30 minutes later, I got a call. Well, we've changed our mind. We've decided to do that. Canada and Mexico, actually, when we formed the California Leafy Green Agreement, actually made it a law, required it. Any produce from coming to California had to be a member of the California Leafy Green Marketing Agreement, or they couldn't export to those 2 countries. That's how important it was. The FDA was ecstatic. CDC was ecstatic. USDA was ecstatic that we were taking it in our own hands finally and doing something about it, not waiting for government to act. And the more you do that, the better chance you're going to get it right. So again, those are some of the things I've been doing, some of the things that Western Growers does. I don't know if there's any time left for questions, but If there is, I'm happy to take them.
Yeah. Tom, really appreciate your insight and the history you have with Western growers and sticking up for California and Arizona growers in the fruit and vegetable industry. So really nice having you here, and we'll open it up for questions. I'm sure we've got a lot. Eric?
Yeah, thanks. That was a fascinating and fun presentation. Thank you. My question is about what used to be NAFTA, and I'm just curious, it just happened. And I don't follow this closely. So what is the overlap between the way the world used to work and the way the world works today with regard to trade? I guess specifically with regard to specialty crops.
Well, if you look at NAFTA, for example, not much has changed. We got a few things settled with both Mexico and Canada. Some are just U.S.-Mexico, and some are just U.S.-Canada, because we have bilateral agreements and letter agreements. On the Canadian, I think the dairy industry benefited quite a bit from the changes in NAFTA. The poultry industry, chickens and eggs, benefited from it. The wine industry was helped. Cheese industry was helped quite a bit. So there wasn't much on the fresh produce side that got done. But, you know, we told the president and the trade representative and the Secretary of Agriculture, we don't have any problems with NAFTA. So don't screw it up. You know, we're happy with the way it is, even with its flaws. We're happy with the way it is. We're doing okay. It could always be better. And one of the things we always wanted was, it's been a universal issue. It's called SPS, you know, and it's just your sanitary and phytosanitary issues. We want to send something to a company or to a country X, and country X is in full season with that commodity. They don't want their growers to be injured by American produce coming in that may be of a better quality or a good price. And so they say, you have a disease. We don't have this disease in our country. You have this insect, you have this, you have that. So these are what we call non-tariff trade barriers. It's not a tariff, but it's tantamount to a tariff, because you still can't get your goods in. It's not only not too, instead of being too expensive, you can't get in at all. And so we got some help there. So we're going to, you know, the government's going to be more involved. USDA is going to be more involved. More science and technology, more peer review on the sanitary and phytosanitary issues are going to happen. So for me, I mean, Canada, there weren't big changes. Mexico, we also had some changes on labor laws. Not as much as we wanted, because if you don't enforce good labor laws in Mexico, then how do Western California producers compete with what comes out of Mexico? Well, what's happened now, because of a lack of water, a lack of labor, and, pardon me for saying it, overregulation, that's where they've gone. They've gone to Mexico. So a lot of the produce that comes to the United States from Mexico is by our guys right here in California that produce it, and they produce in a big way. Well, what does that do? I mean, we always say that for every farm labor job, we create 2 to 3 non-farm jobs. Well, you know, let's say we have 500,000 farm workers. And if that creates 2 to 3 jobs, that's a lot of people. And whose economy is benefiting? The foreign economy is benefiting. So when people say, well, we don't want those people harvesting our crops, you're saying, okay, let's give that economy to a foreign country. Let them employ their workers and let them have the non-farm jobs that get created, and the heck with what happens in California, because we're a country of laws. I know that only addresses NAFTA. Does that answer your question?
As a follow-up on NAFTA, is it true that the tariffs will stay in place until the agreement is signed, or that the tariffs go away?
I think once the agreement is signed, the tariffs go away. But they did not negotiate the tariffs on steel or aluminum. Those are still in place and still have to be negotiated.
So it's going to be several months then before it's approved?
I don't know when it goes to the floor.
60 days, but it has to be voted upon then. Yeah. And then following up with the immigration, are we just destined to muddle through this whole immigration for the next few years because no one can agree on anything? Is that just going to be the status quo?
Well, not if I have anything to say about it. And I'm dedicated to making sure this gets done. this is not something I take lightly. This is not work for me, okay? This is what I want to see done. This is what's right. This is what we need in this state. And I may die going down, trying to get it done, but I'm going to put all my efforts and all my resources into it and try and keep people on the same page. The problem is they split agriculture. They try and create divides. And nobody is better than that than the American Farm Bureau Federation. Every time there's a bill, before we've gotten any concessions out of the judiciary, the American Farm Bureau says, oh, Chairman Goodlad, yes, we're good friends. We'll take whatever you give us. Oh, I know it's not good for the others, but you know, that's okay. California Farm Bureau, outstanding. Hand in glove, ready to go toe-to-toe. And they went toe-to-toe with the American Farm Bureau. And they were with us all the way. And they were great leaders on this very issue. And almost every ag association in the state agrees that the Goodlad bill doesn't work. Now, a couple don't agree with that because instead of listening to their members, they're listening to the lobbyists. And the lobbyists want to have good relations with the Judiciary Committee. Well, I don't care what my relationship is with the Judiciary Committee. If they're going to keep playing this kind of game with our agriculture, well, what good are they? They're not going to do us any favors. So why not take them all? I have talked to Paul Ryan specifically about the Goodlad bill. Oh, it's terrible. It would decimate California. Kevin McCarthy, oh, terrible. Decimate California. And yet it's still alive. Why is it still alive? Well, you know, there's some politics involved. Once in a while, that happens. There's a speakership involved, although that's looking less and less like a problem. Unfortunately, the people who seek that office, that's possibly less and less a problem. And maybe if it turns out that we have a split, we have a Democratic House and a Republican Senate, maybe we can get done what we got done in 2013 in the Senate. Maybe we can get some bipartisanship. Reasonable people can come together and do those things. So believe me, we're not going to stop trying. And they're going to still try and pass that bill, even though they know it's going nowhere, up until, you know, the new House comes in January. So we're aware of that, and we're watching it very closely.
Well, sir, I just completed a training on how to be an effective speaker on complicated subjects, and I presume to give you an A+.
Thank you very much.
They said, be clear, be authentic, and tell a great story. So you're inspiring. I just had one comment, which is when someone says a person is illegal, I get, you know, I feel awkward about that. I feel like I don't want anyone to be illegal, but I don't want to be illegal, and I want to be a lawmaker. So it's a term that causes me a confusion and upset. I prefer undocumented because that looks like a way forward. If we have undocumented workers, then we could work on documenting them rather than to try to legalize them. So I'm just wondering if that enters your thinking or if you find that helpful.
I do find it helpful. In fact, I refer to them as falsely documented, because if you say they're undocumented, that means that the employer broke the law. And the employer has to have the documents. But if they look legal on their face, he can't question the documents. He has to accept those documents. That doesn't mean he doesn't know they're illegal. If they're false documents, it just means that he's going by the law. And it says you have to accept them at face value. Otherwise, you get too much potential for discrimination, just because someone doesn't speak the language as fluently as you do. So I always like to call them falsely documented workers, because they do present documents. We have copies of those documents anytime that ICE wants to look at us or anyone else wants to look at us, we can show them we've got the documents there. And if it turns out they're false, well, okay, then we take whatever action is necessary. And it's not easy when you get raided and you lose most of your workforce in a highly perishable crop. Extraordinarily difficult. So pray every day that ICE will go away. Rain we want, ice we don't.
just want to thank Tom for his leadership. I mean, you can see he's a natural-born leader. And so I want to thank you. We worked together on all the things you've talked about for a long time, and so I'm glad you're not going to give up, because we can't.
I'd like to thank you, too, for your leadership, both on the state level and the federal level, and especially on the personal level. You've been a wonderful friend and to agriculture and to us, and you've just done a phenomenal job, Secretary. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Tom. For a break. All right, we're going to take our break. Speakers are invited to join us in the room outside and to the left, and we'll reconvene at 1 p.m. Thank you. Call our meeting back to order, and we'd like to begin this afternoon with a presentation from Jamie Johansson. What's that? Oh, so I skipped. Sorry, you definitely have to wait. I'm trying to get ahead of myself. Sorry, by Jeannie Merrill with CalCAD. Jeannie, sorry about that. I just tendency to do that. So Jeannie Merrill is the policy director for the California Climate and Action Network, CalCAN, the organization that works to bring a sustainable agricultural perspective to climate change and agricultural policy. CalCAN's efforts are aimed at increasing funding for research, technical assistance, and financial incentives for farmers who practice reduce greenhouse gas emissions, sequester carbon, and provide many environmental co-benefits. So, Jeannie, welcome. We've spent a lot of time together at the science panel, so good to have you here at the State Board.
Thank you so much. Thank you, President, Secretary, board members. Wonderful to be here with you all. I realize it's been a little while since I've been to the State Board of Food and Agriculture, and it's a great time to be here. I'm going to focus mainly on a report that we recently released, which you all will get copies of. It's called Climate Threats, Abundant Solutions, Climate Change and Agriculture Recommendations for the New California Governor. It takes a look back at all the progress made under the Brown administration to address climate change and agriculture issues, and then looks forward on how we double down on those efforts. Let's see, to advance the slides. There we go. So Don gave a great introduction for the California Climate and Agriculture Network. We've been around for almost 10 years now. We got started as a coalition of sustainable and organic agriculture groups for two reasons, really. One was out of concern for climate change impacts on California agriculture, that California agriculture was really on the front lines in many ways with rising temperatures and greater weather extremes, but that agriculture also has a lot of solutions to offer when it comes to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and increasing carbon sequestration in agricultural soils. And we wanted to insert a voice into the implementation of the state's it's the country's most ambitious climate change law, AB 32, because back when we got started, there really wasn't much of a conversation around climate change and agriculture, and I think that's changed pretty considerably. But first, let me start with the why. This may be a familiar slide for many of you. This comes from a recent UC review of the climate science and climate change impacts on California, with a specific focus on California agriculture. A number of UC researchers put this together. And this provides just a snapshot of what it may look like for us as temperatures rise. We well know that California depends on storing our drinking water as snow. About 2/3 of our drinking water is stored in the form of snow, typically. And we would expect with a lower warming range, if we do a decent job, but not a great job at avoiding the worst impacts of climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we would expect a 48% loss of snow by the end of the century, and a 65% loss if we don't do a very good job at reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So that's significant and speaks a lot to how we're going to manage water in the future, how we're going to store it and conserve it. The other things just to quickly say about precipitation is that California can expect a 50% increase in the number of severe droughts by the end of the century and a 50% increase in the number of severe flood events. So how can we have those two things? Climate scientists are calling that precipitation whiplash, that we can go from one extreme to another. So if we do our work now, and I wanted to comment on the Global Climate Action Summit, I think one of the messages that I took away from that important event that Governor Brown and his administration put together was essentially internationally we have 2 years to bend the curve on greenhouse gas emissions to avoid some of the worst impacts of a changing climate. That's pretty profound. So 2 years from now, 2020, is when we need to start seeing international greenhouse gas emissions go down to avoid some of these worst impacts, including precipitation whiplash in California. Next slide. So let's talk about agriculture. Again, this slide shows sort of high and low warming scenarios dependent upon how well we do with reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Increased temperatures, of course, affect crop yields. And when heat hits also matters. So when severe heat waves hit, whether it's in the spring or midsummer. And you can see here that a number of crops, some fare better than others. Alfalfa actually is okay, whereas sunflower, cotton, wheat, even rice and tomatoes, less so. And then if we look at other crops that are really dependent upon winter chill hours, we can see already in our lifetimes that winter chill hours in the Central Valley have diminished pretty significantly. In the 1950s, growers in the Central Valley could rely on having somewhere between 700 and 1,200 chill hours. By 2050, we expect significant declines in chill hours. And you can see there in this particular graphic, the greater chill hours in the blue-green, and then the declining chill hours get sort of red-yellow. By 2050, we would expect a decline in avocados by 40%. And I'll say one of the things I think that came out of the summit and we've learned through climate science is that the predicted impacts are happening sooner and harder than what we anticipated. So one of the things that we've been doing recently is holding climate change adaptation listening sessions with farmers and with technical service providers and people who work in agriculture throughout the state, and heard recently in San Diego from some involved in the avocado industry, and they expect in the next few years that they could be looking at a loss of up to 1 million acres of avocados. Pretty significant hits, and sooner than what anyone had anticipated. Again, going back to the UC study, under these warming scenarios, Central Valley land suitable for walnuts, apricots, peaches, nectarines could be cut in half by the end of the century. So what are we going to do about that? Well, the state has in 2006 passed AB 32, the Global Warming Solutions Act, which committed California to reducing its emissions to 1990 levels by 2020. We've since passed new legislation that requires a 40% cut below 1990 levels by 2030. And there are many programs to get there, right? And cap and trade is just one of them. The cap and trade program puts a cap on the largest emitters of greenhouse gas emissions, requires them to hold allowances, essentially permits to emit greenhouse gas emissions. And those allowances, a portion of them, are sold by the state on auction. Those auction proceeds, the state has then been investing in climate change programs since 2014, and the state has invested about $8 billion since 2014. The bulk of that goes towards transportation, sort of tailpipe-related emissions. 60% of those funds are continuously appropriated. So they're not part of the annual budget process. They are by a percentage. 25% goes to high-speed rail, for example. 20% goes to affordable housing and sustainable communities. One of the climate smart agriculture programs called the Sustainable Ag Lands Conservation Program, which is all about protecting agricultural lands at risk of development. That's part of that 60% continuous appropriation. So as people working on the budget process, we don't have to fight every year for funding for the Sustainable Ag Lands Conservation Program. It gets 2% of that $8 billion. But here's the sort of recent breakdown of climate smart ag funding. And you'll see here the orange bars are for funding from 2014 to 2016. This is in millions. And blue is 17-19. There are some assumptions here. We assumed the same amount of funding for SALC for 2018 as 2019. Similarly, same amount of funding for dairy digesters and for the alternative manure management program. So let me just briefly explain what these are. I'm going to start with the original programs, so SWEEP, the State Water Efficiency and Enhancement Program. It's all about working with farmers to improve irrigation management to save water and energy. It's coordinated here at CDFA, enormously popular program. The demand has far exceeded available funding. And so far, the program received about $66 million in that 2014-16 time period, and now has $20 million in bond funding. So SWEEP and Healthy Soils both received Prop 68 bond dollars, which Rachel spoke about Prop 68 earlier in the day. SWEEP did not get an allocation of cap and trade money this year or last year, so that's been a change. Also, in terms of the initial climate smart ag programs, you have the Sustainable Ag Lands Conservation Program, or SALC, up there. Again, that's part of that continuous appropriation, so we're not fighting for funds every year. To give you a sense of the impact of that program, since 2014, and they haven't announced their funding for this year, they'll announce that in November, but since 2014, that program has funded conservation easements on 80,000 acres of land in California. And that compares to the roughly 55,000 acres of farmland that was protected by the California Farmland Conservancy Program, which is a bond-funded program, over a 20-year period. So in 4 years, we've protected 80,000 acres with SALC, and in 20-plus years, we protected about 55,000 acres. So it's a significant difference. It just shows you what stable, continuous, robust funding can do. And then the Dairy Digester Program got an early start in 2014 with $12 million and has seen significant increases in its funding since. The programs that are more recent are the Healthy Soils Initiative, or Healthy Soils Program. Started in 2017 with an initial small amount of money of $7.5 million, now has a combination of cap and trade funds and bond dollars of $15 million. The Alternative Manure Management Program, this is a program we work a lot on, and that is all the ways on a dairy or in a livestock operation that you can reduce methane emissions that aren't a digester. So composting of manure, dry manure management, pasture-based strategies, et cetera. Another very popular program. And then we have a set of newer programs that were funded just in the past couple of years with significant dollars. So the farmer program essentially took cap and trade money and put it into farm equipment upgrades. Prior to that, the state had funded that effort through a fee-based mechanism. And then the Food Production Investment Program FPIP is about how to support food processors in becoming more energy efficient or using renewable energy. And then REAP is the Renewable Energy Program for Agriculture, about using renewable energy. So that's the sort of the landscape of investments in agriculture when it comes to climate change. CalCAN, the California Climate and Agriculture Network, we are most focused on climate smart agriculture programs that provide benefit in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, increasing carbon sequestration, and providing multiple benefits to farmers and to the environment. So our focus has really been on healthy soils, SWEEP, the Alternative Manure Management Practices Program, and the Sustainable Ag Lands Conservation Program. And so we wanted to look back at what is the progress that we've made under this administration on addressing climate change and agriculture issues, and where do we need to go in the next administration. And significantly, what we need to do is we need to scale up. So if you just look at Healthy Soils, AMP, SALC, and SWEEP, about 800 projects have been funded since 2014, reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 43 million metric tons. Most of that actually is on the farmland conservation side. If we really want to have a climate impact as well as have all the other benefits of these programs, improving water holding capacity for soils, increasing biodiversity, saving on water and energy, et cetera, we need to reinvest and invest more significantly in the climate smart ag programs that provide multiple benefits. And as a part of that conversation right now, the Air Resources Board, along with sister agencies like CDFA and the Resources Agency, have been tasked by the Air Resources Board to come up with what is the target by which we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions through natural and working land strategies. So how in agriculture and in forest and wetlands, et cetera, can we help achieve our very ambitious GHG emission reduction targets, and what is the right target for natural and working lands? And that conversation is ongoing. And we expect an update on that plan at the November ARB board meeting. But we also, it's not just about money. It certainly is about money, but it's not just about money. But it's also about integrating these efforts a little bit more. So we're doing a lot, and we've found a lot of interest, even in the dairy crisis, among dairy farmers to apply for and seek funds through the Alternative Manure Management Practices Program, where they're moving from a wet handling of manure to dry manure to composting to compost back barns, et cetera. If we're creating more compost through dairies and we want to incentivize compost use on the cropland and rangeland side through Healthy Soils, we should be looking at ways to bring AMP and Healthy Soils together so that we can figure out how to better connect those producers. So we're interested in what are the opportunities for the next iteration of these programs so that we're breaking down the silos and having conversations across project types. Another example of that is with the Sustainable Ag Lands Conservation Program. The state is spending so much money to permanently protect at-risk agricultural lands. Is there more that we could be doing to support farmers in their efforts with on-farm management to do the kinds of things that Healthy Soils and SWEEP are incentivizing? Can we bring those incentives through the easement program as well? Streamline. A lot of people talk about streamlining of regulations and lots of efforts on this. Our report, all 60 recommendations, we have a number of recommendations in there on how to do that. And we focused in particular around the irrigated lands program, where we've got producers who are doing practices that get them away from heavy synthetic fertilizer use and are focusing on more Healthy Soils type practices. We should be trying to figure out how to bring the irrigated lands program, which is a difficult program for farmers to engage in, and efforts like the Healthy Soils Initiative, how can we break down some of those silos and make it easier for those producers who are doing innovative things to get out of the burden of some of those, of the regulations of the Irrigated Lands Program. Something for the next administration. And then importantly, we have to level the playing field. In California, about 20% of farmers are socially disadvantaged farmers, farmers of color. We have a number of women farmers. We also have, California is a state of many small and mid-scale producers, which we define as sort of 500 acres or less. And we need to figure out how to prioritize investment into those farmers who make up a significant part of our landscape, but don't necessarily have the resources to address the climate extremes that are coming at them. So I didn't have this slide up in my presentation until Friday because Governor Brown just signed AB 2377, and we were very pleased to sponsor this legislation, to work quite closely with CDFA to work out the details. And Assemblymember Jackie Irwin from the Ventura area sponsored the bill. It was supported by nearly 40 different ag, conservation, environmental groups. It was a very diverse group. And this bill came out of recognizing that the state was investing considerably in climate-smart agriculture, but we didn't have the capacity to build the technical assistance to work with farmers at the beginning of a project to help develop what their project might look like, all the way through to project implementation. We had funds to help with grant application, and that was important, but we really needed the outreach and education project development side in addition to the project implementation side. So AB 2377 was about defining what technical assistance is and about reinvesting in technical assistance in California. We've got great technical assistance providers through co-op extension, through the resource conservation districts, even a number of nonprofits, but we lacked the ongoing capacity for them. So what the bill says, or what the law now says, is that 5% of the budgets for healthy soils, SWEEP, and AMP will go into a technical assistance fund at CDFA, and then technical assistance providers, whether you're an RCD or co-op extension or nonprofit, can apply to that fund and receive up to 3 years of funding, up to $100,000 a year to work with farmers specifically on developing and implementing projects that fit within those 3 programs. The bill also prioritizes technical assistance for small and mid-scale producers and then sets aside 25% of those funds to work specifically with socially disadvantaged farmers. So there's great work to be done by Thea and others right from the get-go. But we're very excited to see this get through and are really looking forward to working with CDFA on implementation in the new year. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeannie. Open it up for questions. All right. Yep. Martha?
Thank you, Jenny. The question I had is the 5% is on the existing budget or an increased budget?
No, it's on an existing budget. Yeah, and it applies both to cap and trade funds as well as bond dollars. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Judy. So there's, I'm thinking about sort of the number of programs that provide, slightly different focus, technical and financial support. And if you combine that with, federal programs, and then there's others that, have you done much thinking about sort of delivery of all these sort of environmental goods to the farm community and, whether it's packaged in a way that it's sort of easy access for folks to learn about and access, and do you have any thoughts about how to improve that?
Yes, we think about that a lot. A couple things to note. One is with AB 2377, there's language in the bill that requires CDFA, which I think they would do anyway, to work directly with NRCS on the development of the program guidelines for the Technical Assistance Fund. And the notion there was that's just one more entity in the state that has significant, connections to farmers, and that it's important to get their feedback on how to make that work. And then on the Climate Smart Ag programs, we've been in very close communication with CDFA about the program guidelines and trying to simplify those for farmers. I think we're in the middle of a comment period there. We think there's opportunity still to make it easier so we're not asking farmers to write essays about the environmental co-benefits of cover crops. We hope that goes away. But I think there is a real desire and interest at CDFA and NRCS and these entity and RCDs and Co-op Extension. I mean, there was the recent announcement about the new Climate Smart Ag team, a partnership between CDFA and UC, which we think is excellent. So I think we're going from infancy, and we've been awkward walkers, and now we're going to get to running, and part of that running is to be able to convince farmers it's worthwhile to stay with us. And I think that's going to be a big part of the next iteration of these programs.
And I think we have a great resource in California in our RCDs and their staff, and not all of them. And funding for an RCD is a tough deal. It's not necessarily stable and secure, and so the successful ones have figured that out, and so they, in their geography, become sort of the point of translation for all these programs. The farmers don't have to understand the programs. They have an RCD that can do that, but it's not. I don't think the coverage is universal.
That's right.
I just, one example. I've been spending some time in Missouri lately. They have we have a program there, and so I was visiting, and I was stunned that so Missouri has a sales tax, a portion of sales tax that goes to natural resource conservation. I think it generates something like $80 million a year, and I don't know. I may be misquoting, so I'll check my facts. But it's quite a bit. It goes into sort of state parks but one of the things they do is that they have 50 state private lands biologists employed by the state, farmed out to I don't know how many counties there are in Missouri, but somewhere between 50 and 100. So not every county has a private lands biologist, and those that don't, Pheasants Forever actually augments that, and so there's 12 Pheasants Forever private lands biologists, and so almost every county in Missouri has a private lands biologist who can provide technical support to.
And in California, we have Point Blue doing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Yeah, so we're a much bigger state.
Yes.
Probably have fewer people doing this. It's an interesting model and one that I envy. But figuring out ways to just make it easier to get at the sometimes confusing morass of programs that we create at the state level would be great.
Thank you so much for this report. It's really terrific, and it certainly walks us through step by step kind of what would be great to have the next governor do. Also recognizing that part of what has been so amazing about Governor Brown's legacy is his desire to step out and be a global leader, and to really make this part of his legacy around climate change and climate action. I'm wondering if you guys, sort of in your hip pocket, have the bold brand and vision that you could offer a charismatic leader who perhaps has grand ambitions in terms of what his legacy could look like around agriculture and climate change. Because I do think while this captures all of the things that we all know need to get done, it's not necessarily here's what you can do and here's what we can achieve kind of in the big grand vision. So I'm just asking a little bit of a rhetorical question, but actually I hope you can share that you guys have something in your hip pocket too that is a little bit kind of the sassier, sexier version of the big dream.
Well, I won't attempt to offer that maybe right now, but I think it's a fair point. And, I think for Governor Brown, we're excited to see that he's headed to a ranch and will be engaging, I'm sure, still on these issues and perhaps putting into practice much of what he's helped facilitate here. So that's exciting to see. And I think, I think one of the clear messages coming out of the global Climate Action Summit is that you can't get there without agriculture. So we certainly are attempting to provide a roadmap for California and how it could get there. But we also have to make it exciting for the next governor to feel like there's real opportunity and that there is a growing consensus in the agriculture community and the larger environmental community that this is a worthwhile endeavor. And I think we're getting there, but there's more to be done.
I do, and I'm going to forget his name, Jonathan Rockman? Was it Johan Rockman that spoke with Christina at the opening session, who made it very clear, looking at all the charts, that we can only achieve these targets by refocusing on the land and the soils and the forests, and that it was only going to happen with a revolution of understanding how critical that would be to making this happen. And that is the big grand vision, because that's also the only way to feed an ever-growing world population. It is the best way when you look at the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN to help people out of poverty, as our speaker from Malawi said, and we can't do it without women being more involved in helping to lead this, because they're the ones that suffer the most, and they tend to make up the vast majority of the literally millions and millions of small-scale farmers on a global basis. But at the end of the day, it also has to make a lot of sense from the farmer's business case point of view. And I think that's where we really need to fill in some of the rhetoric with, there is a very strong business case. Living with my brother, have his 10-year journey and all of this. So there's lots of work for us to do, but I think it is a revolution. Not to sound revolutionary, but everybody else does these days. So it's a very opportune time to bring this home.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeannie. All right, now Jamie. Jamie Johansson was elected president of the California Farm Bureau Foundation in December 2017 and has been a statewide officer with the organization since 2009. Jamie grows olives and citrus fruit in Oroville and operates an olive oil company, Lodestar Farms. Jamie, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Don. It is nice to be here, and thank you for the invite, Secretary Ross. I don't have anything really formal planned. I can touch on some national issues. I know you heard from Tom Nassif, who I have quickly grown to look up to as a new president and someone with experience of what's going on here, Tom? But he brings a lot of clarity. And I can tell you as a small farmer, and I kind of bring a different perspective maybe to Farm Bureau. I'm proud of it. I appreciate the membership for recognizing maybe a different look to a president, and that is I'm a first-generation farmer. I started my farm in 1993. I grew up in Humboldt County. Of course, all my friends were farmers and ranchers and dairymen up there, so spent my summers bottle feeding calves, bucking hay, back when you actually had to pick up 75-pound bales of hay. I didn't even see it, it's automated now, so I tell my kids now, like, you're out of job, I guess, because that's how we went through summers. And then one thing I'm really proud of, and it's great about Farm Bureau too, is the diversity that we grow, and that is also in timber, and certainly with the forest fires and the issues that we have in our hills right now. We are strongly addressing that, but I spent my summers in college working at the Pacific Lumber Company. They're in Scotia, the last company town in America until about 4 or 5 years ago. And it's a perspective that really changed me, because I ended up going to the University of Alabama for 2 years before I transferred to Colorado State. A great experience, but I remember I was back in Alabama as a political science major, and that was back, the Headwaters Forest debate was really heating up, which was literally in my backyard. But it was interesting to hear those conversations happening in your, political science 101 classes, then come back and work in a lumber mill, where my friends had been working there, they're on their 4th, 5th generation, and had been working in the forests, and really thought an industry that could never go away. And much, I look at the same as in agriculture. We can take things for granted, and dynamics, society can change really fast. And certainly we have seen a change up in the North Coast. And I kind of bring that experience where we take everything serious and we want to engage on every issue at Farm Bureau. But after college, had an opportunity to start with 20 acres of olives in Oroville. and figure out what I could do as a farmer. So realizing a dream, naively so, because I quickly realized there's not much you can do with olives on 20 acres in terms of making a living, but I worked in construction for a few years, and big break came in 1998. With the rise of the olive oil industry, got a job managing an orchard for a winery out of Hollister who bought a big orchard up there. So now I was farming full-time. Part of the agreement was I get to use their equipment at the time. So I had nice new tractors as opposed to a 1960 Powermaster Ford, which my sons, I can't believe I farmed on that thing on those hillsides. And my one oldest boy is 11, says, I can't wait till I can drive the tractor, and I'm pretty much convinced he's never driving that tractor because it's dangerous. But you make it work, and that's what we do in agriculture is we make it work. And that's what we're seeing right now is how do we make it work? And I'll touch, I was just back in DC testifying before the House Natural Resources Committee on some legislation dealing with ESA, and recognizing that we have our own ESA program here in the state. It was kind of interesting as we're trying to find ways to make it work at the federal level. But I touched on one thing, and that's one thing that we need in agriculture, and that's regulatory certainty. And I can say that's the one thing that we struggle with, is not knowing what we're going to expect day to day. And you may hear phrases, whether it's you know, the chemicals that we can use on our farm, or even the water on our farm, and the waters of the U.S. Rule and the Obama administration, but really it adds to this regulatory uncertainty, which we can't operate in agriculture. One of my favorite quotes I was told was, you know, to be successful in farming, 1,000 things have to go right in a year, 1,000 things. To be a failure, only one thing has to go wrong. And it truly is a struggle every year to make things work, not only financially as we look at the trade situation, but also just in knowing as we look out. And I said this back in Washington, D.C., the only thing we ask is that when we step outside of our house and we look over our land, we should clearly know what is expected of us and how we take care of that land. What is the water of the U.S.? What tools do I have in my toolbox today based on the weather and conditions and the growing patterns that I'm now farming? What are the tools that I can use on my farm? And then am I going to have an open market? And every successful market needs certainty. That's essentially what you're capitalizing on. And we certainly haven't seen that coming out of D.C. too much. But the challenges are real, but there's never been a more exciting time. And I had an opportunity as a first vice president, one of those big multinational ag corporations, asked me to come to San Francisco and teach to or talk with their largest growers. There was like 8 or 9 of them there with their wives, and it was kind of one of those wine and dine trips in San Francisco. So I got a free steak dinner at a big steakhouse in San Francisco, and got up the next morning and talked with them. And I was talking with these guys who were some of the largest producers in America. And they asked me about the Farm Bill, and I said, that's kind of funny you would ask about the Farm Bill. I should be asking you. I'm just a small farmer, and so we were talking about the farm, and one guy says, I'm the largest recipient of, at the time, the direct payments in the nation. And I was like, all right. So we started talking some more about how he does it. And he farms in 3 different states. He's like 40 or 50,000 acres, just an insane operation. And all of a sudden it struck me. And so as I was giving my presentation, I asked everybody, these large farmers, and I said, who here could do exactly what you're doing today and be as successful 20 years ago, 25 years ago? Not one of them raised their hands. That's how much their industry's changed. And I can tell you as a young farmer, I couldn't do what I'm doing today if it wasn't for the technology and the changes we've seen in the last 20 years. I just finished my 25th harvest last January. But there's never been a more exciting time to be in agriculture, whether you're a large farmer or even a small one. 25% of everything I sell is online. 25% of our other sales are at farmers markets, and the other 25% is on the farm. And the importance of the farmers markets, the online, and having a tasting room on the farm is that the sales don't have to stop now. So they come to my farm, and it isn't just a once-a-year visit when they see their grandmother or just passing through town, but they literally can purchase and be a customer year-round. And I love to tell people that when it comes to olive oil, there's a whole lot of states who can consider me their local olive oil because it's one of the many crops that we grow here that are only grown here. So it's an exciting time, but it's never been more challenging. And I always like to bring up, too, as we look at the challenges facing us, it really is a lot of the regulations that we pass really hit the small guy first in terms of their ability to spread those costs over numerous crops. I will tell you right now, I was singularly focused, did it for olive oil. I am scrambling now to diversify. You just simply have to. I don't care if you're farming thousands of acres or 10 acres. The quickest thing you can do is diversify. The other thing you need to do as a farmer is how to prolong your crop, but food processing is another major issue that we face, and certainly something in Washington, D.C. with the Food Safety Modernization Act. We have kind of stuck our neck out a little bit, been a little more critical of that act than most other ag organizations, but simply because we view it as a modernization act that looks at one size fits all for all crops, and certainly we don't have that in California with the diversity of crops we grow, whether it's citrus, and certainly admire what the lettuce folks have had to do to keep their industry going. But we think that there's a different approach when you look at some of our tree crops and other crops that have never had a problem. But really everything here wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for an agreement I made with a gentleman there, Andy Rodriguez in Oroville, when I first started out not knowing how to farm. I leased my land out to him, and the agreement, the typical agreement, 75-25. He gets 75% of everything brought in, and I get 25% plus the water bill. But I said, I'll make this agreement, but you have to teach me how to farm. You have as I go along, because eventually I want to do it myself, and he agreed. And his son was one of my first friends I made in Oroville. And it was fun to watch his son grow up to become a law enforcement officer and then start his own business where, you know, millions of dollars in billable hours, and how he grew up in the ag industry and traveling up to Oregon to pick cherries with his father, and then in peaches in Yuba City. And it really occurred to me that I owe a lot to the guys that come on my farm. I don't know if you've ever picked olives. You really try it once, and then you really don't want to try it again. Because it is a talent, and that was the first thing that I learned, is the talent that we have in terms of the people that pick and harvest our crops. And I think that was a thing this year with everything going on in the labor bills and the Goodlatte bill that really made it passionate for me, is that we were forgetting how dependent we are on our workers, and they also forgot to mention how much a part of our families they have become. And I think one of the things that makes me the saddest is that as we see this rancor across the country in terms of immigration in general, but our farm workers, is that loss of camaraderie that we've had with our farm workers. And I can remember, you know, we had the seasonal workers come in, and every year it was the same families or the same guys or gals that would come in there, and you really got to know them. And then eventually you saw that change as the border became more strict, or people became more fearful. And you know, I mention all this is because I used to enjoy harvest time, and now the liability, and we see what's happening with ICE and the liabilities of knowing who on your land is there legally or illegally, really puts a lot of pressure on the farmer, who the more time you spend in the field, the more liable you are for knowing what's going on out there. And I miss those times in the field. You simply can't take those risks. And that's really what's changed, and I think that's what started really the passion, certainly we've had in Farm Bureau, to get immigration, to get farm labor right. And the first thing that the Goodlatte bill failed to do was recognize that it's usually not just one person that you're dealing with on the farm. What about the wife, the significant other, or the children back at home? And that was the first thing we asked for, that really we kind of went sideways with our mother organization. The American Farm Bureau was bringing in, that's great, we can have an adjustment of status for the farm worker. We definitely want that. But what does that do for the family members who are now exposed? And we have to deal with those families. And then you see the tragedies that we see on the Texas border and the separation of families. It was the Goodlatte bill, in our view, was just asking for that to reoccur, but on the farmer side, where a farm worker maybe went back to his country and got his visa stamp or his H-2C program visa, but really, how about why would he want to make his wife and kids stay in the shadows? And how do we bring them out? How do we bring them out and get them fixed as well? And it's a very difficult, especially this time of year, in the silly season, as we call it at Farm Bureau, the election time, all the election politics. But those are the big discussions we have to have and we have to figure out, because there is no way, I know personally as a farmer, we can stand for having families torn apart and be separated unless we have to be able to find out how to make them whole. The other thing, the Goodlatte bill that really fired us up, was not recognizing truly how important labor is, especially to California. And that was with the cap system, which they had at 460,000 or 450,000 workers under the H2C program. Now, I'll tell you, you will have people from Congress who will refute that number and tell you they actually made it higher. But as Tom will tell you, they said a lot of things, but were they weren't very forthcoming in putting in writing. And one thing we want it in writing. We want to know what to expect. And so it was interesting as they did this cap of 450,000 to tell them and say, do you understand that in terms of seasonal worker use in California, California uses 460,000 people in a year. We would eat up that entire cap. And I know, the Secretary of Ag could declare an emergency and raise the cap, but they simply do not understand what we do in California, and that's the biggest frustration. We also understood is that the other thing that has to happen too, and that the Good Lap bill was standing in the way of, was what we call at-will portability of a visa or at-will employment. And that does two things. At-will employment is that a worker can go from farm to farm, that he can chase the highest dollar, that he isn't bound by contract that he signed maybe in his home country, came here, maybe realized he could have got more, or maybe could have done better for himself and his family, but that he has a worker visa program that really allows him to sell his skills. That not only empowers the farm worker, that program empowers the farmer, who can chase the most talented employee with the highest dollar, that we can recognize talent and we can pursue it with the highest dollar that we can pay. And especially for the smaller farmer, who really a lot of times is dependent on who will show up that day and walk up the driveway and offer them a fair wage. And that's something that you don't see too often in the Midwest in terms of that kind of dynamics happening on the farm. And so it really has been an education process, and a process that I've really enjoyed and certainly have relied on Mr. Nassif and Western Growers. And I've served as a vice president for 8 years in the California Farm Bureau, and I'm proud that this is the most I've seen Western Growers and California Farm Bureau work together, and there couldn't be a more important cause that we work together on. And going forward, that relationship continues to grow because we are almost an island unto ourselves. I know that Secretary Ross sees that in her travels as well, to educate everybody around the country about just how important we are. The other thing as well is the touchback clause on the Good Lap bill, something that I know has kind of, they've tried to minimize, but that is that a worker would have to go back to their original country and at least touch back. We have approached them on the idea of going to a consulate. Again, not having to separate the families and the children. And they make it sound as simple as, you simply get on maybe a van or a car and go down to a Starbucks in Tijuana, get your passport stamped, and you come back. And we try to inform them, like, you know what, none of us like going through TSA. We don't trust going through TSA and popping up on a no-fly list. You are asking these people now, especially in this political environment, to trust you, the government, and get in a car or a van, be taken back, and then you'll be back by afternoon. No one trusts that. You wouldn't trust that. How do you ask them to do that? So the fight is going forward. I am happy that we've been successful in holding it off, and there's a number of national organizations who have told their members that if it was not for a California Farm Bureau or a Western Growers Association, the Good Lap bill would probably be at least in the Senate. I don't know if they had a vehicle in the Senate to get it through, but it was your California groups who have stood in the way. Now, we're taking a lot of heat. My employees have been in a lot of magazines as being the roadblock and difficult, but it's a good fight, and it's one that we'll keep you posted on going forward. I'm happy too that though we are part of the American Farm Bureau, we need them to be successful. We are planning, if hopefully nothing comes up in a lame duck session, that we can all get together and talk about going forward and what's the language that we want, that we can submit proactively instead of having a bill given to us. So again, nothing more important in my life than those workers who taught me how to farm and made me successful to be a farmer today. I don't know, success is relative in farming, but I still do it, so I guess I have been successful. The only other, and I can take questions on everything, but the only other issue that we really are involved in this year was trade. And a lot of people, and I know in the water debates, I'll be up front, a lot of people said, well, why do we even need trade? And it was a question we had to ask during the drought. Why Why are we using this water to export our crops? Because half of what we produce has to go into the trade market, a significant amount of what we grow. And to have that room and to have people farm and create markets wherever they can makes opportunity and room for small guys like myself. So we have partnered with the American Farm Bureau, Farmers for Free Trade. I know some of you, Secretary Ross has participated just in bringing awareness to how important trade was in the early years. We've done one in Lodi, done one in Fresno, and we did one in Kern County, working with the media and talking about how important trade is. And it's been eye-opening for people to see how much we export and how dependent we are. It's interesting, the trade thing, people had even within agriculture didn't really think much about trade if you're a small farmer or not directly exporting, but some way, half of what you produce is dependent. And what would that do to price if we couldn't get rid of it? It is interesting, because I haven't heard many people talk about it, is the Farm Bill expired on Sunday night. But it just kind of was lost on everybody as we talk about NAFTA. And I think that shows the education and kind of that fine line that we've walked. Listen, at California Farm Bureau, I've heard from all sides of our members. Some understand how difficult it is to work with China. It wasn't too long ago that President Obama and USTR was in front of the WTO trying to file charges or file action in the WTO because China was subsidizing their agricultural industry by $100 billion, which is interesting as we get raked over the coals for a $12 billion trade, trade program. That it wasn't that long ago that it was China who was subsidizing $100 billion. That was conservative compared to even this administration uses that number as well. So my farmers realize that how difficult it is to work with China. And they would even say behind, we're willing to be patient. But now what we're seeing is really the rubber meeting the road, and that patience runs out. We knew that we were willing to go down the road with, I would say, is like, we knew who was getting elected, and there was a willingness to go down that road. But that road was getting shorter and shorter, and we started to see the effects on walnuts. We started to see the almond industry. And then, of course, the grape harvest right now, where 40%, what they used to send over, they couldn't export anymore. So we're seeing that effect, and this hopefully this new solution with NAFTA and NAFTA 2.0, is acted quickly in the 2019 Congress, because that's where it'll have to be acted on. But we live in interesting times where, like it or not, we're dependent on a global market. And one of those things as well is the European Union. And it's interesting over there, it's not so much raw product, but it's the games they play with our value-added products, especially our almond flour over there. But there's this whole dynamic of how do we grow this ag economy in California? How do we make it accessible for everybody? And trade's gonna be an important part of that. And that's what brings us really to something as a small farmer I never thought mattered to us, but that would be the Farm Bill. That expired, of course. It's interesting, everyone panics about the Farm Bill expiring, but then all of a sudden, the 11th hour, you're like, it doesn't really matter right now. We just have to get something done, by January and continue to work for that. But the Farm Bill really is important to California in terms of the funding we get for our trade promotion programs and also our EQIP programs. We don't like to say it too loud, but a lion's share of those fundings, the conservation programs comes to California. And we like to keep that a little bit quiet because we don't want them to get any ideas of cutting it, but that's what we fight for. And those are the programs really most at risk in terms of continued funding of those programs, and especially in our specialty crop grants as well. The other part of that is the timber part that people forget about, the forestry chapter of the Farm Bill. And I want to say thank you to this administration. There's a lot of dynamics happening, and SB 901 went on. We kind of took a no position, but we were actively involved in what it's going to do in terms of forestry management and the $1 billion to deal with our forests to prevent these forest fires. And that's kind of exciting. And it's fun to go back to DC and show them concrete of what the governor has signed in SB 901 and look at them and say, ball's in your court. Because now it's time for you to take care of your federal lands. And certainly we are working on some of those provisions within the Farm Bill that we take care of our forests. And if you look at our forests, and most people are amazed, it really is the start. When we talk about our water system in California, that is the start of it. That is the watershed. That is really where our snowpack and our rainfall and everything, where it comes from. So an important aspect, but a fun aspect to work on as president of the California Farm Bureau, and one of the few and the only agricultural group that works with forestry. Cattlemen do a little bit in terms of grazing, and certainly need to figure out how we make those lands more accessible to our cattlemen. I'll let you know, we were just up on a tour in Lassen National Forest. The grazing permits, I believe they have around 60 grazing permits available up there. Only half of them are used. So if we talk about what's available for cattlemen, people say, well, they're available, they're just not using them. Well, they're not using them because there's not regulatory certainty of what's expected to them and what, you know, where can their cows go and everything like that. So those are the issues that we need to work on, is bringing regulatory certainty in our forests as well. So I don't know how much, you probably wanted some questions. I just kind of gave you a brief overview of my life, hopefully threw in a few issues that we're working on, but it doesn't stop there. And we didn't even talk a little bit about water and where we're going, and certainly SB 1 with the funding being assigned and what's happening. It's now in the federal, in Congress's court as well, in terms of them updating and expanding the federal water project. And I think one of the things that we see in the Sacramento Valley is a Sites Reservoir, which really is a joint project, could be a joint project with the state and federal water projects. It kind of would be exciting to have that kind of partnership between the two water systems. And one thing we know in the north is that we need to ensure that our water can get down to the south as well, to those farmers as well. So with that, I know I'm forgetting tons of stuff that I came prepared for, but thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Jamie. We'll go ahead and open up for questions from the board. Yep, go ahead, Helene.
Jamie, I was at a meeting about a week or two ago, and the walnut producers were just reeling over the loss of markets through the trade, but also the tanking of the price that they would get. And they were concerned that people are going to have to start paying back loans starting in January based on a price that was much higher. Has there been any discussion with Farm Bureau and with the feds about, you know, any kind of support for some of these people that have lost? They're going to lose a lot more than just the market, but they've got these loans now that they won't be able to pay back.
Yep, absolutely. And this is the rubber meeting the road, and the administration sees it. We had Greg Dowd, the chief ag negotiator for USTR out in California. I'll tell you, I was pleased with. We had a great dinner with him. Don and Secretary Ross were there. And I like to point out this, is they're fully aware of what is happening in farm country. And I was pleased that he was here, not just for a press conference, not for a photo op, but for 3 days. And he asked us to design a tour for him that took him all over the state and ending here in Sacramento at Blue Diamond, talking about those issues that, you know, right now you haven't really heard from farmers yet. He chastised us a little and said some of our comments weren't helping. We were helping out the Chinese in our comments, all this stuff. And I said, you haven't heard anything yet. And now it's building. And I think that was kind of the impetus to get, you know, they want to put the NAFTA behind them and focus on China. But unfortunately, that's what, for our walnut growers, there's still a little bit of a road to go for all of them. So the effort's not over. We hope they can just focus more and not take on the whole entire world. And that's the thing that caught us off guard, was that it really ultimately came us against the world. We're like, can we do one at a time here? You know, and with the NAFTA agreement, or I guess it's a United States, Mexican, Canada agreement, act, we're trying to figure out how do you pronounce that? You got to be able to pronounce these acronyms. Is that, you know, you may hear a lot about it. We're glad it's behind us. We're excited. I would say, you know, peripherally, it does seem to be a win for this administration. But remember when we went into NAFTA, what did agriculture ask for? Do no harm. We just leave us out of it. Please leave us out of it. So there isn't much we can complain about other than now we need to repair. If there's identify any lost markets, and they need to invest in that. One of the was a $12 billion put up by USDA in terms of compensation. Half of that was going to go to direct payments. Walnuts were not brought into that, but almonds were. And well, dairy for the first time in terms of direct payments. But maybe we can work together, California, because there is a lot of trade promotion money in there for trade promotion that we should actively seek and put together those tours for our producers.
I was wondering if you could talk real quickly just about who your members are. I guess, I've worked with Farm Bureau and Western Growers for a long time, but I don't actually really understand who your members are, how much overlap there are between, for example, Farm Bureau and Western Growers, and if there are certain characteristics. I mean, I was interested to note that you work on forestry and some ranching issues, so your membership must cut across some tree farmers and ranchers and things of that nature.
We
So-
do. We're a general ag organization, roughly around 35, 40,000 members. Only about 9,000 of those are what we call associate members who are not involved in agriculture, but enjoy agriculture, maybe grew up in it, maybe are sell insurance, maybe are in a rural community. Our members are actual producers, according to our bylaws. And we have a county board in every county, save San Francisco and Alpine. A couple counties like Inyo-Mono and Yuba and Sutter are combined into one county farm bureau, but we have a county farm bureau in all the other counties with an executive director and their own board, who I answer to. And we meet once a year at an annual meeting this year. So this is a great year to invite you all to come down to San Diego, because it will be our 100th meeting in San Diego, the first week in December. And come down, and if you haven't experienced an annual meeting at Farm Bureau, it's a working meeting. I remember I got my first assignment to go talk to another ag organization, not Western Growers, another smaller group of people down in Newport Beach. And I thought, well, that's a nice gig. But I went down there all ready for policy discussion, geared up, and they don't do it like we do it at Farm Bureau. And we sit down, we spend a day and a half going over a whole policy book and just either reviewing it or bringing up new issues. This year's issue will be will be industrial hemp is one that will be an interesting discussion we have. I will let you know American Farm Bureau's policy is in favor of industrial hemp. So by default, that is our policy unless we were to write something different. But we have discussions about everything. If it has to do with agriculture, it's on our plate. And sometimes I wish, I am envious of those presidents who have one or two crops maybe they have to worry about. But all different sizes. From organic and farmers market people like myself to, I'm not organic, but from the small to the big.
Jamie, I'm a little bit debugger here about the famous CRA, but Joseph Otin, who's the controller of the currency, he's from California. He's now in DC. He's coming 2 weeks from now to one of our events with Latino farmers and Latino ranchers. And I have been advocating to him that the fact that this is happening and that, in the large scale, the larger farmers are suffering, but also it goes down, right? And so he's looking into a credit to the banks in exchange for extension of the loans. So instead of having to pay immediately, they will extend the loan or they'll freeze the loan for a year, and they'll get some credits on the CRA. I'd like you to look into it. I'll be more than willing to introduce him to, because you'll have bigger ideas. Ours is a much smaller idea, but it's to protect our little farmers.
Yeah.
Please do so, because he loves California. He was the president of the banks in California. He understands that DC sometimes is completely isolated from California, and that's why he's coming to get more on the ground.
It'll be interesting. Thank you.
Anyone else? Crystal?
I just want to thank you so much for your remarks and for sharing the insights that you have. When you said that they haven't yet heard from your members, what would that look like? Like, how do your members actually get their voices heard in these debates and in these conversations?
Well, it said we have a county board made up of directors ranging anywhere from some counties 15 to 30 that our members can attend, and they raise an issue or they can recommend a policy change that then filters up to like my board. So I have a state board of directors made up of those different counties that can bring it up to the state level. And then the counties can introduce at our annual meeting, they will introduce changes that they want to see, or they will ask us questions directly. But it is truly a grassroots organization. I always like to say, when I got elected president or vice president originally, you talk about your experiences, what are your views, what are your activities in, farm politics or whatever. And then it's interesting because as soon as you're elected, they pretty much tell you, we don't care what you think, here's what you think now, and they hand you a policy book. And so it's kind of a wake-up call, but that policy book is made up by our voting farming members. And it simply is telling farmers if they don't like it to get involved at the local level. We meet, I know in Butte County, my home county, meet once a month, first Thursday of every month. And if people want to show up and bring up an issue, that's where it all starts. And then we also have a leadership day in Sacramento where we have commodity groups, or we call them issue advisory committees, based everything from technology to an organic and direct sales committee to, anything in agriculture that they can come to and attend and voice their opinion.
Great. I guess I had more in mind the idea of some, tractors rolling up down the Capitol Mall. But I'll leave that to you guys to determine.
Had an activity for the first time since 1993 or 2003 recently, so, it does happen.
But Jamie, I've got a question for, well, more of a thank you to the California Farm Bureau, yourself, and to Tom and Western Growers for fighting the immigration bill, the Goodlatte bill. I think maybe Washington was taken a little bit back by the strength of our position in defending our workers and defending the workers that are here already, that we really need for agriculture here in California. So I guess, did that take DC by surprise a little bit that we were so adamant? Or, I mean, like you said, they're family. I mean, these
Right.
are not people that, they've been with us for many years and have great relationships with the workers and their families. And to have you guys stick up for them and fight for their position here in the U.S., I think is admirable. So.
Yeah. I think Tom and I at times were pretty surprised, and we have great leadership back there from California in our congressional delegation on both sides of the aisle who really helped us out because you need both, but also just our voice. And I'll tell you, it was an interesting conversation with some people who saw where we were coming from, and it was hard to get them to stand up because maybe there's cultural situations in their state or in their boards or in their organizations that they just couldn't get around. And that was probably for me kind of some. How do we empower those people to stand up with us? Because certainly it felt a lot that Tom and I were alone standing up there. But there are a lot of people behind the scenes who are like, we get it. We don't like this either. Well, then stand up, and someone's got to stand up and say something here. Going forward, the issue's not over. So let's just, how do we get to be more proactive? And then as November ends, who can we identify to be our champion in both? The important side will be on the Senate side as well. Closest we ever came was from the Senate side in 2013, right, Tom? Where it passed out of the Senate, the most difficult body to get it out of, where legislation goes to die, and they wouldn't even take it up in the House. So we know that we have legislation, or we have solutions that could potentially get to a Senate, but we got to make all those pieces work.
Difficult job.
Yeah, it is, and thank you for doing this. I have actually two questions. One is that there were a couple of commodity organizations that took a different position on the immigration bill. Is there any opportunity to bring all of the California together on this one? And secondly, it seems that as they've gotten into serious negotiations with leadership on the Farm Bill, it sounds like all of a sudden there's quite a list of issues where we all thought it was kind of isolated to maybe one or two.
Right. Well, on the first question on the other ag groups. So, right, that was something we recognized, maybe a little disconcerting in some of the other ag groups in California at kind of the 11th hour. That was through active engagement from committee members back in DC coming out to California because they knew California was the roadblock. So that means they're going to work you the hardest. I think the difference came in just terms of level of trust, and we wanted a lot of stuff in writing, and they weren't going to put it in writing. And so we weren't going to go there, having been working so passionately on it so closely that we wanted it in writing. We weren't just going to take, we kept asking, what will be the interpretation by the Department of Labor? What will be the interpretation by all the other government agencies, 4 or 5 that deal with labor and farm labor in particular. If you're in the H-2A program, I think you're dealing with 4 or 5 different federal agencies. We want it in writing. And then some people saw the legitimate kind of political maneuver that at least it was a vehicle, at least it got it to go somewhere. Well, when you start getting this, if you remember, you have all the omnibus bills coming out now of the Senate and everything to keep the government running. If it attached to one of those, there is no way to negotiate. They said, well, we'll negotiate in the Senate side. Well, you're getting kind of late in the game. And the game really was with the DACA and the DREAM Act when President Trump at the State of the Union last year said he wanted to open that up and to 1.8 million individuals, which we all like, who said that? And we thought that maybe was a vehicle, maybe going forward, because that issue still is with us as well. And maybe there's a way that we can work on that issue with what our farm workers need, because they both need the same thing, and that's adjustment of status. Oh, so Farm Bill, yeah, it's hard, The one thing about the Farm Bill, I think everything is pretty safe in terms of what I'm hearing. I don't know. I haven't talked with anyone who's on the committee. I think the biggest roadblock is still on the nutrition title in terms of the back to work provisions in there. We don't have a position other than, our only position on the Farm Bill in terms of nutrition is that they should be tied together. And at least we didn't have this argument in this Farm Bill, a crazy notion of separating them. But in terms of the back to work programs, I don't think it will be as impactful on California because we'll interpret it a different way. But, other than that, I haven't heard too much in terms of where the parties are at. I'm sure maybe Tom might know, being closer to it maybe, on where they're at in the nutrition title. But in terms of the ask, there is some different stuff in there, and those are the adjusted gross income levels that the houses are. Senate side, 900,000 AGI limit, or they want to bring it down to 700,000 AGI limit on your commodity title. We can't have that in California. Our crops are simply just too valuable, and another thing they have a struggle with to understand. On our conservation titles, I believe they want to do an AGI of 600,000. So if you are above $600,000, you can't qualify for the conservation titles. That needs to change as well. And so those are stuff that we need. Those are really the two that we really need to follow in terms of what's happening in the negotiations in the House and the Senate side.
Well, Jamie, thanks again for coming. Okay, really appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
Okay, Josh, November 6th meeting.
Thank you. So in talking with Jeff Huckabee from Grimway, it looks like we'll be having our November 6th meeting on Tuesday in Bakersfield, and we'll most likely do something the evening prior on Monday. So as soon as I get details worked out with Jeff, I will send that information out to everyone. So again, if you could hold Monday evening and then meeting on Tuesday in the Bakersfield area. 6th, Election Day, Tuesday.
Yeah, I just got a mail in for my absentee ballot.
Draft meeting dates for 2019.
Yes, and I've included a list of draft meeting dates on the left-hand side of your folder for 2019. These are kind of my suggestions, basically staying again to the first Tuesday of the month. Given that there will be an administration change and that January 1st is a holiday, I'm recommending that we maybe cancel our January meeting and reconvene in February to give the new administration
Not that we wouldn't have fun here.
Exactly. So I did not schedule a two-day meeting. There wasn't kind of a Tuesday, Wednesday kind of combo that we could look at. We've done in previous years, so I did not schedule a two-day meeting. But I think there's always that option to expand upon one if we decide to do that.
Thank you, Josh. Ashley, if you could give us your Water Solution Network.
Yeah, I just wanted to make an announcement and encourage anyone who has good candidates in mind to nominate them. There's a network called the Water Solutions Network that was created by the SD Bechtel Foundation, Coro Foundation, WELL, which is Water Education for Latino Leaders, and they're working to create a network of water leaders across sectors that to train in kind of collaboration, build relationships, encourage more collaboration across public sector, private sector, NGOs, and others. And they've done one cohort this year, which is ending up in November. The second cohort is going to focus on the Central Valley. So they are going to specifically recruit 3 sub-cohorts from the Sacramento Valley, the Delta, and the Tulare Basin. They're not explicitly excluding the San Joaquin Valley, so I think if you had candidates from the San Joaquin Valley, you know, between the Delta and Tulare, those would be eligible too. But I think this is a really terrific opportunity, given that the importance of managing water kind of across basins, collaboration, thinking about upper watersheds as well as the valley floor. This is a real opportunity to bring people together. It is a significant time commitment. I think it's like 6 different meetings of at least 2 days. But the current cohort and people I've spoken with speak really highly of it, that it's been very worthwhile. So I just want to encourage people to, you can go to their website, it's Water Solutions Network, and the nominations are open from now through November 9th. So I really encourage people to nominate people they think would be good candidates for it.
Great, thank you, Ashley, appreciate that. At this point in our meeting, we're going to open it up for public comment. If you'd like to address the board, please come forward and give us your name and what you'd like to speak about. No? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. Good to see everyone here and the audience as well. So our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.